Sherlock Holmes and the Escape of Lord Stalworth, an Honoring Audiobooks original story from the reminiscences of John H. Watson, M.D. Chapter 1, A Letter from the Past. It was in the dwindling weeks of a damp and restless October that the matter of Lord Stalworth once more occupied our minds. I had been indulging in a rare moment of leisure, reading the newspapers by the window of our Baker Street lodgings, a tepid cup of Darjeeling cooling at my elbow, when Holmes let out a peculiar hum from his corner by the fireplace. He was slouched in the armchair in his usual disjointed fashion, one leg hooked over the armrest, his eyes half-lidded but glinting with an unmistakable sharpness. "Watson," he said at length, holding up a folded sheet of creamy stationery, "would you be so good as to remind me of the particulars surrounding the supposed demise of Lord Alaric Stalworth?" I set the newspaper aside and regarded him with some surprise. "Stalworth? Good heavens, Holmes! That was over 5 years ago. He was believed to have perished in that fire at Manderley Manor, burned to the very foundations, if I recall. There was a body found, charred beyond recognition. The authorities were satisfied it was him." "Indeed," Holmes said, tapping the letter against his knee. "And yet, unless the Royal Mail has taken to spirit correspondence, I have here a missive bearing his unmistakable signature." I rose and crossed the room. Holmes handed me the letter. The seal was a broken crest, the silhouette of a rearing horse flanked by thistles, Stalworth's family sigil. Inside, the handwriting was elegant, slanted, and unmistakably cultivated. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I find myself in need of the rare talents you so proudly advertise. A matter of great importance compels me to surface from the ashes. London is a city built upon secrets, and I intend to reveal them. You will receive more in due time. For now, watch the embers. The fire has not gone out. A. Stalworth." "This is a jest," I said, though I did not believe it even as the words left my mouth. The cadence, the venom wrapped in silk. If it were a forgery, it was masterful. Holmes had already risen. He stalked to the window, peered out through the drizzle, and then paced back toward the fireplace. "It is him," he murmured. "No man but Stalworth would be arrogant enough to write me in riddles and threats while asking for aid. And the postmark, Docklands, the place where he built half his black market empire before it all came crashing down. But what could he want with you now? If the reports were false and he survived, surely his first concern would be escape, not drawing attention. Unless," Holmes said, the corner of his mouth quirking upward, "drawing attention is exactly the intention." He pulled his violin from the side table and began to pluck at its strings, each note sharp and contemplative. "Watson, do you recall Chief Inspector Alec Darnley?" he asked without turning. "Of course, he led the investigation into the Manderley arson, a capable, if somewhat rigid fellow. I believe it is time we paid him a call. If the dead have truly begun writing letters, it is best we ask the coroner who buried them." The streets of London were thick with the perfume of fog and smoke as our hansom cab rattled down to Scotland Yard. The gas lamps along Fleet Street cast halos through the mist, illuminating hurried silhouettes and the occasional flicker of a constable's lantern. Holmes remained silent for most of the journey, his sharp profile etched against the murky window like a figure carved from stone. When we arrived, the yard was a bustle of bureaucratic disquiet. Clerks hunched over ledgers, the scent of pipe tobacco hanging in stale clouds. Darnley's office was on the upper floor, tucked beside a row of filing cabinets that looked older than the Queen herself. "Gentlemen," Darnley greeted us with a tired nod. His graying temples and the deep lines about his eyes betrayed the strain of his office. "Holmes, Dr. Watson, to what do I owe the pleasure? Or should I say, the warning?" Holmes wasted no time. He handed the letter to Darnley without a word. The inspector scanned it, his brow furrowing deeply. "Bloody hell! Is this genuine?" "We believe it to be so," Holmes said, "though that remains to be proven." Darnley exhaled through his nose and sank into his chair. This city barely caught its breath after his supposed death. The man was a ghost, even when alive, pulling strings from the shadows, leaving no fingerprints. You know, the Crown dismissed several leads simply because no one could prove he existed beyond rumor. And now this. "I need everything you had on him," Holmes said. "The original case file, testimonies, evidence logs, autopsy reports." Darnley stood and moved to a locked cabinet, withdrawing a thick, battered folder. The name Stalworth was scrawled in fading ink across the front. It's all here. But I warn you, most of it won't help. That fire burned more than just the manor. Holmes took the file with reverence, as though accepting a relic. I shall take my chances. That evening was spent in an orgy of paper and smoke. Holmes sat cross-legged on the carpet. The contents of the folder fanned about him. I brewed strong tea and took to categorizing the reports. Witness statements, inventories, scene sketches. One stood out among them. A page yellowed with age, its ink smudged and hurried. It was the autopsy summary. Holmes, I said, there's something peculiar here. The body found in the ruins, burned beyond recognition, yes, but noted to be smaller in stature than Stalworth was known to be. 5 inches shorter, at least. Holmes leapt to his feet and snatched the paper from my hand. His eyes flicked over the words, alight with fire. A decoy, he whispered. He left a corpse in his place. Perhaps a servant, perhaps a drifter, and everyone took the bait. How could that have been missed? The fire. It erased all doubt. And perhaps, he added, tapping the page, perhaps someone wished for the case to be closed. The next morning, as a fresh rain washed the grime from the cobblestones, a second letter arrived. This time, it was not addressed to Holmes, but to Lady Eugenia Bellingham, widow of the late Lord Carrington, one of Stalworth's bitterest political enemies. Holmes acquired the letter through one of his many channels of information, specifically a footman at the Bellingham estate who owed him a favor after a scandal involving forged paintings and a jealous governess. The message was shorter, more pointed. My lady, your husband believed truth could be buried beneath title and coin. How fortunate that I am not so easily buried. The reckoning begins. A. Stalworth. He's not just resurfacing, Holmes said as he read it. He's waging a campaign, one built on vengeance and spectacle. I could not help but feel a chill settle in my bones. The man we had pursued years ago, more phantom than flesh, was now flesh again, and he had not forgotten his enemies. What now? I asked. Holmes's eyes glittered. Now, Watson? We dig. Into the ashes of Manderley, into the accounts of the noble and the wicked. Somewhere in there is the key to why he vanished and why he has chosen this moment to return. I nodded, sensing already that this case would not simply be a matter of solving a crime. It would be a matter of surviving the storm Lord Stalworth intended to unleash upon the city. And so it began. We rode in silence to Scotland Yard, the clatter of hooves against cobblestones echoing like distant thunder through the mist-hung streets of London. The lamps, newly lit, cast long golden shafts across the pavement, glinting off puddles left by the late afternoon rain. The handsome cab rocked slightly with the irregularity of the stones beneath us, and I could not help but steal a glance at Holmes, who sat with his fingers steepled beneath his chin, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over his intense gray eyes. Lestrade will be rattled, Holmes murmured finally, breaking the silence. He is not fond of ghosts, nor of criminals returning from the grave. You truly believe it is him? I asked. Stalworth? I believe we must entertain the possibility, however improbable. The alternative is equally unsettling, that someone with knowledge only the true Lord Stalworth could possess is using his identity as a mask. We arrived at Scotland Yard just past 6. The gas lamps flickered in the hallway as we were admitted and led to Lestrade's office. The inspector, a wiry man with sharp cheekbones and perpetually narrowed eyes, greeted us with a mixture of relief and annoyance. You took your time, Holmes, he grunted. This mess has every commissioner from here to Whitehall breathing down my neck. Holmes ignored the jab and immediately strode to the desk, where several pieces of parchment lay in careful arrangement. He studied them silently for a moment before selecting one with gloved fingers and lifting it to the light. I presume these are the letters, he said. Have they been handled? Only by me and 2 officers, Lestrade replied. We wore gloves, just as you'd insist. Holmes read the first letter aloud. To the Hon, Reginald Forsyth, you once dined upon deceit and drank deeply of treachery. Now the hourglass empties. My return is not a miracle, but a reckoning. Prepare for the mask of society to be torn away. The letter was written in a bold, archaic hand. No address, no postmark, but the parchment was fine, a vellum stock not commonly found. 3 such letters have arrived thus far, Lestrade continued. This one to Forsyth, another to Lady Ellingsworth, and the last to a Bishop Wentham of St. Mary's. All prominent, all, as it turns out, with historical ties to the Stalworth scandal. Holmes raised a brow. And the original case files on Lord Stalworth? May I review them? I had them brought up from archives, but I warn you, it was a tangled affair even then. As Holmes pored over the old case folders, meticulous but faded records from 12 years past, I found myself staring at the sketch pinned on the wall, Lord Stalworth, as he was before his supposed death. The image portrayed a man with a noble, angular face, a thin moustache, and deep-set eyes that seemed to glower even in charcoal. I remembered the trial, though I had only heard of it through the newspapers at the time. Henry Alastair Stalworth, a peer of the realm, had been revealed as the orchestrator of one of the most elaborate embezzlement and blackmail rings London had ever seen. Dozens of influential names were caught in the net, some willingly, others blackmailed into silence. When his crimes came to light, Stalworth had fled. His body was found months later in the Thames, face mutilated, identification confirmed by a ring on his hand. Only now Holmes questioned whether the body had truly been Stalworth's. "I should like to speak to the recipients of these letters," Holmes said suddenly, snapping the file shut. Lestrade looked reluctant. "I can arrange it, but they're a skittish lot. Lady Ellingsworth has threatened to leave the country already." Holmes offered him a thin smile. "All the more reason to move quickly. Watson, we must make haste to Mayfair, Lady Ellingsworth first." Lady Ellingsworth resided in an imposing red brick townhouse, nestled between two ivy-wreathed manors on Elvington Terrace. A liveried butler admitted us, his face taut with worry. The interior was richly appointed, filled with ornate furnishings and ancestral portraits peering down with grim disapproval. In the drawing room, the lady herself awaited, an iron-willed dowager of 70 if a day, dressed in deep violet with a pearl choker clasped tightly at her throat. "I'll not be frightened by phantoms," she declared upon our introduction, her voice more commanding than one might expect. "If Henry Stalworth walks again, then the devil walks with him." "Lady Ellingsworth," Holmes said gently, "you were once associated with the Honorable Society of Temperance, an organization that Lord Stalworth used as a front for some of his dealings, were you not?" Her expression flickered. "It was not known at the time. Many of us gave money freely, believing the cause just. When the truth came out, we were humiliated. Some of us never recovered. And yet Stalworth's body was found. Or someone else's," she snapped. "He was always 2 steps ahead, a shadow within a shadow. I always believed he would return." She reached toward a drawer and removed a small wooden box, unlocking it with a tiny brass key. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay an envelope, a second note, one Lestrade had not seen. She passed it to Holmes. He opened it, and his eyes sharpened. The masquerade ends where it began. "Look to the mirror, Lydia. You may not like what you see." Signed only with an elaborate S. "Stalworth was a master of secrets," Holmes murmured. "He cultivated them like a gardener tending roses, dangerous ones, thorned and toxic. Tell me, Lady Ellingsworth, what secrets have you kept?" Her gaze did not waver. "None that concern you, Mr. Holmes. If he intends to expose me, then so be it. But you may not like what you find either." Holmes inclined his head, but I saw the flicker of interest in his eyes. We left as the sun vanished behind the fog-drenched rooftops, plunging the city into premature night. Holmes walked briskly, ignoring the cold. "Did you see the way her hands trembled?" he said suddenly. "Lady Ellingsworth is terrified, not only of Stalworth, but of whatever truth he threatens to reveal. And that second letter, it was scented, with orris root, an uncommon choice. You think that points to the sender? I think it points to someone with theatrical inclinations. Stalworth was nothing if not dramatic. But what troubles me, Watson, is the question of motive. Why return now, after all these years? Why stir a past that should remain buried?" We turned onto a narrower street, the air thick with the scent of coal smoke and damp brick. The gaslights flickered as a sudden gust passed through. "I have a feeling, old friend," Holmes said, "that what we've seen thus far is but the overture. The true performance lies ahead, and its actors have yet to take the stage." Chapter 2. Shadows at Vicar's Cross. The wind had grown keener by the time we reached Vicar's Cross, that odd stretch of city where the old Roman stones still peered through the cobbles like half-forgotten bones. It was here that Bishop Alaric Wentham presided over St. Mary's Cathedral, a looming Gothic monolith that seemed less a place of worship than a sentinel watching over the spiritual rot of its parish. Our cab deposited us at the corner of Briar Lane and Cowper Street. The cathedral towered ahead of us, its ironwork gates creaking in the wind. Holmes disembarked first, his coat flaring like a raven's wings as he strode to the entrance. "We are not simply visiting a man of God," he said quietly. "Wentham was once a politician, and a particularly ambitious one. His path to the clergy was not paved with piety, but with scandal." "I recall," I murmured. "His conversion occurred rather abruptly, following accusations of financial misconduct in the colonial office, which mysteriously evaporated thanks to a generous benefactor with no official name. That benefactor, I suspect, was Lord Stalworth." The main hall of the cathedral was cold and cavernous. Rows of pews lined the nave like ribs, and the stained glass windows painted the floor in fractured halos. Bishop Wentham awaited us near the altar, clad in a vestment of emerald green. He had a lean, hawkish face and hands that trembled slightly despite their clasped serenity. "Mr. Holmes? Dr. Watson?" He greeted us with a voice refined and practiced. "You come concerning the letter, I presume?" "We do," Holmes replied. "You received it when?" "Yesterday morning. It was placed upon my desk, though the doors were locked, and my secretary swears she saw no one enter." He produced the letter from his breast pocket, carefully unwrapping the wax seal, a serpent devouring its own tail. Holmes accepted it with gloved hands. Shepherds must answer for lost sheep. "You clothed yourself in virtue to hide your sins. But your flock is not blind, nor am I." "Repentance cannot be bought, Alaric." S. Holmes examined the handwriting, brow furrowed. "Similar hand. Flourish on the S is identical to the Bellingham letter, but this ink sees sepia, not black. Deliberate variation. He wishes to suggest intimacy. Each letter tailored." Wentham bristled. "If this is a threat, I take it as a test of my faith. The sins of my past are known to God." "Are they known to your parishioners?" Holmes asked pointedly. The bishop's eyes narrowed. "This is not a trial." Holmes ignored him and turned to me. "Watson, would you mind inspecting the doors and windows? I believe our author may have used unconventional means of ingress." I nodded and set about examining the vestibule and clerestory access. The latches were all secured, and there was no evidence of forced entry. But in the northern transept, near the vestry stairwell, I found something peculiar, a faint scuff on the stone sill of a lancet window, far too narrow for any adult to enter through comfortably. But a child? "Holmes," I called. "Come see this." He arrived in a breath, magnifying lens already in hand. He studied the sill, the trace of soot along the edge, and the faint imprint of fingers. A messenger, or more likely, a street urchin. Someone nimble enough to be employed for delivery without understanding the message. He used the drainage pipe outside. Note the scrape on the copper. Our adversary employs old tricks. He stood and turned back to the bishop. "If Stalworth has returned, Bishop, he has not come merely to haunt. He wishes to dismantle. Carefully. Personally. What did you do for him?" Wentham hesitated, then exhaled. "I owed him a debt, a foolish investment, early in my career. He covered the shortfall, quietly, anonymously. In return, I passed him information. Sensitive postings. A few names." "Names?" "Members of a reform committee," Wentham admitted. "Men who stood in his way." Holmes nodded grimly. "Then he is returning their favor in kind." As we departed St. Mary's, the fog had thickened into a choking curtain. Holmes paused at the gate, glancing back at the cathedral's spire. "He's not just settling scores, Watson. He's orchestrating a collapse, a reckoning for those who once conspired in the dark, and he is beginning at the edges, picking away at their stability before striking the heart." We turned down Briar Lane, our footsteps swallowed by the mist. Somewhere behind us, the cathedral bell began to toll the hour. A single chime. A harbinger. "Next," Holmes murmured, "we find Reginald Forsyth." "Before Stalworth does." Holmes hailed a passing cab with a sharp whistle, and we were soon rumbling eastward through the fog-laden streets, the lamps outside the windows glowing like distant stars behind gauze. He sat quietly for a time, his long fingers pressed together beneath his chin, eyes half-lidded in concentration. "Forsyth will be the most guarded of the three," he said at last. "He has spent the last decade fortifying his life against exactly this kind of scandal. Unlike Ellingsworth, He has no interest in legacy, only in control. What do you know of him? I asked. Holmes's eyes flicked open. Reginald Forsyth is a financier of ruthless disposition. He orchestrated the dissolution of at least 4 colonial trading houses in the aftermath of the Stalworth scandal, profiting from the fire, not fleeing it. He is no mere victim. I suspect he was once a partner. As we approached Grosvenor Place, where Forsyth maintained a lavish Georgian townhouse, the wind picked up and carried with it the bitter scent of coal smoke. The cab came to a halt before an iron gate adorned with spear-like tips. Holmes paid the driver, and we approached. The door was opened by a manservant before Holmes had even knocked. "Mr. Forsyth is not receiving visitors," the servant said with crisp finality. Holmes removed his gloves slowly. "Inform your master that Sherlock Holmes is at his door, and unless he wishes his name to become far more public than it already is, he would be wise to grant us 5 minutes." The servant hesitated, then vanished. Moments later, we were ushered inside. Forsyth's study was a den of mahogany leather and dim gaslight. The man himself stood at a bar cart pouring a measure of scotch, his figure wiry, his eyes sharp and pale as frost. He looked us over with a predator's gaze. "Holmes," he said without offering his hand. "And the ever-loyal Dr. Watson. Come to sample my paranoia, have you? Only to investigate a matter which may soon intersect with your well-guarded affairs," Holmes replied. "You mean the letter," Forsyth said. He tossed back the scotch and set the glass down with a firm clink. "I received mine 3 days ago. Burned it. Waste of parchment." Holmes's brow lifted. "You didn't consider it a credible threat?" "I consider it a ghost story. Stalworth is dead, and if someone wishes to dig up his corpse to rattle chains at my window, they'll find I sleep quite soundly." Holmes stepped closer. "You were his partner." Forsyth did not blink. "I was his banker. There is a difference." "But you helped launder funds siphoned from parliamentary subsidies." Forsyth's lips curled. "I ensured liquidity for ventures that paid dividends. If those ventures were morally ambiguous, well, that's politics, Mr. Holmes." Holmes leaned over the desk, lowering his voice. "Your name is the only one to appear in all 3 archival ledgers seized from Stalworth's estate. You think a man like that dies quietly? He died because he overreached. Or because someone ensured he did." Forsyth narrowed his eyes, the temperature in the room seeming to drop. "Be careful, Holmes. Men with reputations like mine do not take kindly to suggestions of murder." "Then I suggest you begin taking kindly to security," Holmes said. "Whoever is behind this has detailed knowledge of your history with Stalworth. I do not believe they will be content to write letters for long." Forsyth stared at him for a long moment, then finally turned his back. "Get out," he said. Holmes nodded slightly. We departed without another word. Outside, the night had settled into a suffocating hush, the fog now thick enough to veil entire buildings in shadow. Holmes said nothing as we walked the length of the avenue. "What do you make of him?" I asked. "He's afraid," Holmes replied flatly. "Not of Stalworth, but of exposure. That letter was no mere warning. It was a promise. Forsyth believes in the weight of secrets because he's been holding them for years. Someone has turned that weight against him." A carriage clattered by, nearly invisible in the gloom. Somewhere in the distance, a constable's whistle sounded twice, then fell silent. "There is something else," Holmes said almost to himself. "Something threaded through all 3 letters. The tone is intimate, personal. Stalworth, or his pretender, is not merely trying to expose these individuals. He's playing a game with them, one that began long before now." "You suspect someone else?" "I suspect someone close," he replied. "Too close. The original investigation presumed Stalworth was acting alone, but I believe that was a convenient fiction." He paused as we turned onto Chancery Lane. "There is another player," Holmes said, voice low. "And to find them, we must go back, to the night Stalworth was declared dead, to the man who found the body." I frowned. "You mean the coroner?" "No," Holmes said grimly. "The watchman who discovered it?" "Gideon Pike. He vanished 2 days after Stalworth's funeral. Unreported. Uninvestigated." "And you think—" "I think," Holmes said, "it's time we dig up a ghost of our own." Holmes fell silent as we walked beneath the wrought iron arch of Chancery Lane. The street was quiet but for the shuffle of the horses in a nearby mews. His steps slowed. Then he stopped altogether, his gaze fixed not on the present, but on some point far behind it. "When I say we must go back, Watson," he murmured, "I do not speak metaphorically. I remember that night vividly." He spoke with a tone I had heard only on rare occasions, when logic gave way to something more human. A memory surfaced, vivid and unbidden. London, 8 years earlier. It was a storm that had battered the city that night, an Easter gale so fierce it tore slates from roofs and sent chimney pots crashing into the alleys below. The gas lamps flickered with every gust, and the streets were glistening slick with rain. I had not been with Holmes that evening. I was at Queen's Gate, tending to a cholera patient, but I would later learn how the night unfolded. Holmes had been summoned to the Thames dockyards by Inspector Lestrade, the message cryptic but urgent. Body found near Blackwall Reach. Identity unconfirmed. Possible link to Stalworth. By the time Holmes arrived, the constables had erected a canvas barrier around the site. Several watchmen stood about muttering, while Lestrade leaned against a post, smoking grimly beneath his bowler. The rain had done little to cleanse the horror from the scene. "Where is he?" Holmes asked. Lestrade jerked his head toward the embankment. "Over the edge, caught in the chain locks of a mooring beam." 2 constables helped lower Holmes down to the slick stones where the body lay. It had been partially pulled ashore, drenched, broken-looking, and bloated from the river's grasp. The face was swollen beyond immediate recognition, but the clothing was unmistakable. Lord Edmund Stalworth's signature frock coat of slate blue, stitched in white piping. A monogrammed pocket watch rested against his ribs, the glass cracked but the initials legible. "Identification?" Holmes asked. "A dock watchman found him just after midnight, named Gideon Pike." "Where is he now?" "Just over there." Holmes looked toward a figure leaning against a stack of barrels under the shelter of a half-collapsed awning. Pike was in his mid-30s, with sharp, alert eyes and the restless stance of a man unused to stillness. He wore the telltale brass badge of his trade, tarnished but intact. Holmes approached slowly. "Mr. Pike?" The man turned, his expression wary. "I? You found the body?" "I did. Floated in close with the tide, snagged on the chain like it wanted to stay." "You touched nothing?" "Just pulled him in a bit, made sure he wasn't breathing. No one wants to be the bloke who leaves a peer of the realm bobbing in the Thames." Holmes examined him closely. "You seem remarkably composed." Pike shrugged. "Seen worse. I was in the Navy before this. Cape Town, Bombay, worse places than London's river." "And you recognized him?" "Not straight off, not by the face. The clothes gave it away. Everyone knows that coat. And the watch. Every dock rat knows Stalworth's watch. He flashed it like a prize." Holmes looked down at the corpse again, then back at Pike. "You're sure it was floating? Not lodged beforehand? You didn't notice anything unusual about the scene?" Pike paused. "Only one thing." Holmes waited. "There were 2 sets of drag marks near the beam. One going in, another coming out. The water hides it quick, but the mud tells." That caught Holmes's attention. "Show me." Pike led him back toward the mooring. The prints were faint, washed out by the tide, but Holmes saw the remnants, streaks where boots had sunk and scuffed, then reversed. "Someone helped him into the water," Pike said. "But someone else checked on him before I got there." Holmes stood silent for a long moment, the rain tapping at his hat like insistent fingers. "I gave my report," Pike added, "but I reckon it got buried. Didn't hear a word after that, not from the yard nor anyone else." Back to present, Chancery Lane. "He disappeared 2 nights later," Holmes said quietly. "Left his flat in Shadwell and was never seen again. No forwarding address, no record of travel. It was as though he had been erased." I drew my coat tighter. "You think someone silenced him?" Holmes turned to face me. "I think Pike saw something or someone he wasn't meant to, and I think that person has returned. Perhaps they never left." He stepped into the street, his coat stirring like a curtain of night. "We find Gideon Pike, Watson, or we find his ghost. Either way, the truth lies with him." Chapter 3. Pike's Ghost. The following morning broke with the weak light of a reluctant sun, one that barely managed to pierce the blanket of London's soot-heavy sky. I found Holmes already at the breakfast table, his plate untouched, and the morning edition of the Times crumpled beside his cup. He did not look up as I entered. "Inspector Lestrade has declined to reopen the Pike case," he said flatly. "He considers the man a deserter, not a victim." "That was 8 years ago," I replied, pouring myself a cup of tea. There was little appetite then for nuance, and even less for lingering shadows. Holmes looked up sharply. Yet shadows linger, Watson, especially when those who cast them are still at large. He stood and crossed the room to his desk, retrieving a folded document. I spent the better part of the night corresponding with my contact in the Port Authority archives. Pike's personnel file was incomplete, but there was one detail worth noting. Just before his disappearance, he filed a report of a suspicious gentleman loitering near the East India warehouse. I raised a brow. A coincidence? I never believe in coincidence where murder is concerned. Within the hour, we were off again, this time bound for the Shadwell docks, that grim corner of the city where fog clung to masts like shrouds and rats darted like messengers through the alleys. Time had done little to improve the surroundings. Our first call was at the Mariner's Rest, the boarding house Pike had once called home. The landlady, Mrs. Margit Finch, answered with her arms folded into her apron and eyes sharp enough to strip wallpaper. "Gideon Pike?" she said, scowling. A quiet one, that. Paid on time, never drank, but he was always looking over his shoulder like the devil owed him money. "Did he ever mention a man following him?" Holmes asked. She sniffed. "He told me once he thought he'd seen a ghost. Said he spotted someone watching him from the alley off Saltwell Court. Said it looked like a dead man." My blood chilled. A dead man? He didn't explain, only said he'd seen that face before, during the inquiry. Holmes leaned forward. "What did he do after that?" "Packed up and left the next day. Didn't even collect his full pay from the dockmaster's office. Just gone." "Did he say where he might go?" She shook her head. Only thing he left behind was a pair of boots and a tin box. "May we see the box?" It took little coaxing. Within minutes, we were examining a rusted metal container beneath the stairs. Inside were a few odds and ends, a compass, a stiletto knife, and a folded slip of parchment stained with oil. Holmes unfolded the paper, studying the contents. It was a hand-drawn map of the docks, annotated with small markings and one phrase, scratched hastily in the corner. "V.O. watches. Beware the bone merchant." "V.O.?" I asked. Holmes frowned. "I do not know the name, but the bone merchant... I have heard whispers of such a figure in the old sailor's parlance. A dealer in secrets, one who traffics in the remains of the powerful." "A blackmailer?" "Of the highest order," Holmes said, "and perhaps the only person who could resurrect a man like Stalworth, if he ever truly died." He pocketed the map. "We'll follow Pike's last footsteps. The alley behind Saltwell Court. If the ghost he saw is real, we may yet find its shadow lingering." The alley was narrow and foul, flanked by crumbling brick walls and crates whose contents had long since rotted. Holmes crouched beside a broken barrel and studied the mud. "Fresh prints," he murmured. "2 sets. One heavy, boots. The other smaller, lighter. A child's." He rose. "The child may be a messenger again, but the adult, he waited here recently, and not for long. See how the prints pace?" I followed his gaze. The pacing steps carved an anxious pattern into the grime. What would bring someone back to this place after so many years? I asked. "Memory," Holmes said, "or guilt." As he spoke, a shadow moved at the far end of the alley. Holmes spun. "Wait!" But it was too late. The figure was gone, vanished into the maze of docks beyond. He cursed under his breath. "We're being followed, and not by the law." He turned to me, eyes bright. "Watson, the game is changing shape. Pike's ghost has returned, but it may not be Gideon at all. It may be Stalworth's shadow, reaching back from the grave to claim the final players of his buried drama." He paused, glancing down at the oily scrap of map still in his hand. "We need to find the bone merchant." The phrase itself lingered with a strange finality. Bone merchant. As if speaking it aloud had invoked something from the very stones beneath our feet. Holmes turned on his heel, eyes narrowed, mind clearly racing. "The docks hide their devils in plain sight, Watson," he said. "If there is a man who deals in the detritus of the dead and the secrets they kept, he will not be found in the drawing rooms of Mayfair. He will be found where men are bought and sold in silence." We left the alley and wove our way through the squalid warren of Shadwell's lower yards until we reached an ancient public house known as the Limping Fox, its name painted in cracked gilt over a warped oak door. The tavern was scarcely more than a crooked room of smoke, low voices, and cracked tankards. A fire burned in a hearth that looked ready to collapse. Holmes stepped inside with the casual gait of a sailor off watch, scanning the room. He nudged me with his elbow. "There," he whispered, "the man with the waxed mustache and a scar along the jawline. That's Danby Flynn. He used to smuggle relics for Lord Stalworth's collections. If anyone knows about the bone merchant, it's him." Holmes sauntered over and dropped a coin on Flynn's table. "Buy us a drink, old friend." Flynn glanced up, his eyes narrowing. "You've got the wrong berth, mate." Holmes leaned in. "We're looking for a man who trades in stories. The kind that rot in graves. The kind who might know what really happened to Gideon Pike." At the mention of Pike, Flynn's manner shifted. His fingers tightened around his glass. "You should forget that name. There's nothing in it but holes." "But there's something in the name Bone Merchant, isn't there?" I said quietly. Flynn swallowed. "There's always someone willing to buy bones, lads. You just need to know where to dig." Holmes smiled thinly. "Then give us the shovel." Flynn sighed. "You didn't hear it from me. But there's a place under the old opium tunnels near Narrow Street. Sailors call it the ossuary. A man lives there, or something close to it. No name, no face, but he buys truths, trades in silence. Some say he's got a ledger of sins longer than the Archbishop's robe." "Does he sell information?" Holmes asked. "He sells absolution," Flynn replied, "but it costs you more than coin." Later that evening, with fog thickening once again into a damp curtain across the riverfront, Holmes and I made our way to Narrow Street. The entrance to the tunnels was half concealed behind a collapsed shipping warehouse. A rusted grate had been pried open long ago, and the air that seeped out was fetid with mold and brine. We descended. The tunnels beneath were low and narrow, lit only by Holmes's lantern. The walls were thick with salt deposits and sea-laced mildew. Rats fled before us in scattered panic. As we went deeper, the air grew colder, not merely in temperature, but in presence. I felt as though we were descending not into a tunnel, but into a graveyard that had never been sanctified. Then we heard it, the slow, rhythmic drip of water, and beneath it, the faint scrape of something harder, bone, perhaps, against stone. We turned a final corner and found ourselves in a rounded chamber. There were candles, dozens, stuck in the cracks of the stone, and seated amid them, like a spider in the center of its web, was a figure cloaked in dark wool, his face obscured by a black veil stitched across a wire frame. He was surrounded by piles of books, human skulls, and ledgers bound in cracked leather. "You seek the merchant," the figure said without lifting his head. Holmes did not flinch. "We seek knowledge, of Gideon Pike, of Lord Stalworth, of what lies between." The figure tilted its head slowly. "Gideon Pike paid dearly to vanish? You would undo that?" "Truth is its own payment," Holmes replied. "No," the man said. "It's a debt, and every debt must be balanced." Holmes stepped forward. "Then let me borrow against my name. Sherlock Holmes." The figure's voice rasped into a whisper. "Then know this. Stalworth did not die. He was traded. His death bought another's silence, and Pike saw the exchange." "What exchange?" I demanded. The merchant turned slightly. "A life for a life, one lord for another. You must find the name in the ledger Pike stole, the true ledger, not the ones the yard burned. That is where Stalworth's death is written in lies." Holmes nodded once. "Where is it?" The figure was silent for a long time. "East," he said finally. "Under the elm that rots behind the dockmaster's bell, buried beneath a sailor's grave." Holmes turned away, but I lingered. Why help us? The merchant gave no reply, but as we stepped back into the dark, I heard him whisper, "Because I too was a client once, and I have paid enough." Later that night, 221B Baker Street. The journal was wrapped in sailcloth, still damp with the moisture of the earth. Holmes unwrapped it gently, as if the pages might tear under a breath. The cover was a deep burgundy, cracked with age, and embossed with a monogram, E.S. Edmund Stalworth. "I had not expected it to bear his initials," I said. "Stalworth was a narcissist," Holmes muttered. "Even his crimes had to carry his mark." He opened the book. The first few pages were encoded. A cipher Holmes dismissed almost immediately. Simple transposition, doubled key. He fancied himself clever, but he was always 2 steps behind the truly dangerous. Within minutes, Holmes had cracked the opening line. Ledger of arrangement between parties sovereign and silent. For the sake of the crown and the preservation of discretion, these entries are to be maintained off record. I felt a chill course through me. "This is not a criminal ledger," I said. No, Holmes replied. This is a catalog of secrets, arrangements made in shadows, names erased, lives exchanged. He turned the pages slowly. Each entry was written in a precise, slanted hand. Lord Ainsbury, debts to East India Co. erased in exchange for acquiescence on Burmese embargo. Inspector Vernet paid 300 guineas to misplace key testimony in dockyard murder. Lady Hallwick's illegitimate heir sent abroad under the name James Callister, informed he died in childbirth. Captain Redfern declared missing in action, but in truth relocated to Argentina. Payment. Silence on mutiny. Page after page. Then Holmes stopped cold. His finger trembled slightly on the margin. Here, he whispered. Stalworth to vanish. Appearance of death staged via body procured from debtor's prison, unclaimed. Witness to exchange, Gideon Pike, bought for silence. Paid with funds from account VO, to be monitored. Below that, in faded ink, note Pike has grown restless. Watch closely. If he moves, he must be removed. Good God, I breathed. Stalworth faked his death and the Crown allowed it? No, Holmes said slowly. Not the Crown. A hidden faction within it. Look at the initials that appear beside each entry, a pair of initials used for approval. VO. They appear throughout. You think VO is the key? I think VO was not just funding this. He was managing it. And whoever he is or was, he is the reason Gideon Pike vanished. Holmes shut the ledger with a snap. This ledger is our most dangerous possession now, Watson. It does not merely expose Stalworth. It exposes a network designed to protect men like him. That network has claws, and it has not been idle. As if on cue, the window pane rattled. Holmes and I turned. Something small and metallic had struck the glass. Holmes moved quickly to the sill, scanned the street, and disappeared from view below it. I followed a second later. On the ground, resting in the gutter, was a copper token. It bore a familiar etching, a scale, slightly unbalanced, and beneath it, Vox Obscura. The voice of the hidden, Holmes translated. RVO has just responded. I looked at him. Do you think they know we have the ledger? Holmes stared out into the fog-smeared darkness. They know, Watson, and they're inviting us to speak or die with our silence. Exploring the entry, Lady Hallwick's illegitimate heir. Holmes sat back in his chair, his eyes lingering on the ledger's neat script where Lady Hallwick's name was inscribed with a quiet cruelty. Lady Hallwick's illegitimate heir sent abroad under the name James Callister. Informed he died in childbirth. I frowned. This sounds like a scandal carefully buried. But what could be the significance of hiding a child abroad, and why in this ledger of secrets? Holmes tapped the ledger's worn page thoughtfully. This entry is a hint at the lengths the elite go to protect their reputation. Lady Hallwick was a woman of considerable influence, a patroness of the arts and an ally to powerful men in Parliament. He stood and began pacing, the flicker of the gaslight casting shifting shadows on the walls. Removing the child was not simply about avoiding social scandal. It was about control. Control over an inheritance, over political alliances, and over information that could unsettle the fragile balance of power. I nodded. Could this heir be alive then? Holmes smiled faintly. More than that, Watson. He must be. Otherwise, why include him in a ledger of active arrangements? His survival is a thread in this tangled web, one that could unravel entire families. I leaned forward, intrigued. Have you heard of anyone named James Callister in London? Holmes tapped his fingers against his lips. Callister is a common enough surname, but I believe the man known as Callister has kept a low profile. There are whispers of a reclusive scholar residing in Hampstead who fits the timeline and bears similar details. He retrieved his pipe and lit it thoughtfully. If we can find this man, Watson, we might uncover a living witness to the ledger's most guarded secrets, and perhaps someone who holds the key to exposing the factions protecting Lord Stalworth. I exhaled slowly, the mystery deepening. Then our next course is clear. We seek James Callister. Chapter 4. Shadows in Hampstead. The morning air was brisk with an early chill as Holmes and I set out from Baker Street, the weight of the ledger still pressing on my mind. The promise of uncovering Lady Hallwick's secret heir tugged at us both, a thread in the sprawling tapestry of Lord Stalworth's dark resurrection. Hampstead, with its winding lanes and shaded gardens, was a far cry from the murky docks and smoke-choked alleyways of the East End. Here, the wealthy and the learned retreated to escape the clamor of the city, Yet even in this genteel refuge, shadows had found purchase. We began at a modest residence on Fitzroy Road, a narrow house tucked behind a high hedge. The name Callister was etched faintly on the brass plaque beside the door. Holmes knocked with his customary precision. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a man of slight build, his dark eyes sharp beneath a furrowed brow. His hair was prematurely silver, and his hands bore the delicate tremor of age or illness. "Yes?" he asked, voice low and cautious. "Mr. Callister?" Holmes inquired, his tone gentle but insistent. "My name is Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. John Watson. We seek to speak with you regarding matters connected to Lady Hallwyck and a ledger of certain sensitive arrangements." The man's eyes narrowed, but he did not close the door. Instead, he stepped aside, ushering us into a dimly lit parlor lined with bookshelves that sagged under the weight of leather-bound volumes. "I was wondering when they would come for me," he said quietly. "Please, sit." As we settled, I noted the meticulous order of the room, a stark contrast to the chaos that surrounded us in our investigations. "Mr. Callister," Holmes began, "we believe you may be the heir to Lady Hallwyck, sent abroad and hidden from the world. The ledger indicates you were told you died at birth. Is this true?" Callister's gaze flickered, a shadow crossing his features. "I was brought to England as a child, yes, but raised in secrecy. My mother's circle insisted I remain hidden for reasons I was too young to understand." He paused. "I have spent my life piecing together fragments of a past not my own." Holmes leaned forward. "What do you know of Lord Stalworth, or of a man named Gideon Pike?" Callister's eyes darkened. "Stalworth is a name that haunts my family's whispered history. And Pike was a man who saw too much and paid the ultimate price." As Callister spoke, I sensed the weight of secrets yet to be unveiled. Secrets that could topple not just reputations, but the very foundations of power in London. Holmes exchanged a look with me, a silent agreement that the game was far from over, and that the deepest shadows still awaited our discovery. Callister's fingers trembled slightly as he took a small, worn notebook from his breast pocket. "This," he said, "is all I have of my past. Scraps of letters, coded journals, and a handful of faded photographs. Lady Hallwyck's name appears often, but always in shadow." Holmes reached out, gently taking the notebook. "May I?" Callister nodded, his gaze fixed on some distant memory. I noticed a flicker of hesitation, as if the act of sharing his story came with an unseen cost. Holmes opened the notebook carefully. Inside were cryptic entries, dates, and references to clandestine meetings at obscure locations around London, some in parlors, others in dingy backrooms. "Look here, Watson," Holmes murmured, pointing to an entry dated nearly 10 years ago. "Met with V.O. at the Red Herring. Discussed final arrangements concerning the heir. Assurance given of protection, pending Stalworth's transition." I looked up sharply. "So V.O. isn't just a shadowy financier. He's actively managing these events." Callister sighed. "The ledger is no mere list. It's a ledger of leverage, of control. Those who possess it hold the power to bend the city and its secrets to their will." Holmes's eyes gleamed with the familiar fire of purpose. "And that includes Stalworth's return. The ledger confirms he was traded, not killed. Someone powerful wants to keep the truth buried. But why risk everything now?" I asked. Callister looked around the room nervously before lowering his voice. "Because the scales are tipping. Someone within the network is breaking ranks. Someone who knows that silence is no longer safe." Holmes folded the notebook with care. "Then we must find this dissenter, and quickly, before the ledger becomes a weapon that destroys us all." A sudden knock at the door startled us. Callister's face drained of color. "Who could that be at this hour?" he murmured. Holmes motioned for silence and moved toward the door. He cracked it open just enough to peer out. The dim corridor was empty. "Likely a rat sent to unsettle us," Holmes whispered. Callister nodded grimly. "They will come for the ledger. For me. For anyone who knows." The room seemed to close in on us. London's tangled conspiracies suddenly as tangible as the gaslights flicker outside. Holmes's jaw tightened. "Then, Watson, we have no time to lose." The knock still echoed faintly in the dim room, a ghostly reminder that the walls themselves might have ears. Callister's unease was palpable, his eyes darting toward the curtained window as if expecting shadows to slip inside. Holmes closed the door quietly and turned toward us with a resolute air. We cannot linger here, nor can we trust this refuge. The ledger's significance has attracted attention far beyond our expectations. I nodded, feeling the weight of the situation pressing on my chest. Where do you suggest we go? If VO and his agents are so well informed, any safe house could be compromised. Holmes paced, fingers steepled beneath his sharp chin. There is one place. An old friend of mine who owes me a favor, a secure retreat away from prying eyes and unwanted visitors. Callister raised an eyebrow. And who might this friend be? Holmes allowed a rare, wry smile. An eccentric botanist named Professor Merriweather. His greenhouse is a labyrinthine sanctuary on the outskirts of the city. Few know of its existence, fewer still would think to search there. I looked between them, my mind already conjuring images of mist-cloaked glass and tangled vines. Very well, I said, but we must move quickly. If those men sent a rat just now, the next visitor may not be so easily deterred. Callister nodded, swallowing his apprehension. I'll gather what I can carry. Holmes and I stepped outside into the chill of the evening. London's gas lamps flickered dimly through the fog, the streets nearly deserted but for the occasional clatter of a carriage wheel or the distant cry of a street hawker. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. Tell me, Callister, I said as we walked, what do you know of VO? The ledger implicates him deeply. Callister exhaled slowly. VO is a shadow more than a man. No one knows his true identity, but his influence is vast. Some say he's a former spy master. Others whisper he might be a disgraced nobleman seeking revenge. But the only certainty is that he operates through proxies, and his reach touches every rung of London's hierarchy. Holmes muttered, Vox obscura, the voice of the hidden, an apt name for a man who prefers whispers to swords. Our journey to Merriweather's greenhouse was tense and silent, each of us lost in thought. When we arrived, the botanist greeted us with surprise but no questions. Holmes, always a pleasure, Merriweather said, ushering us inside. The interior was a world apart from the city's grime, a jungle of exotic plants and flowers, their scents mingling in the warm air. Holmes wasted no time. Professor, we require your utmost discretion and protection. This ledger, he held up the worn book, holds secrets that could topple empires. Merriweather's eyes gleamed with curiosity and something darker. You have my word. As night deepened, we settled into a guarded vigilance. Holmes and I pored over the ledger once more while Callister shared more fragments of his story, a childhood hidden in shadows, threats that had followed him across continents, and a relentless fear that the past would consume him. Suddenly, a faint rustle from the greenhouse entrance startled us. Holmes was instantly alert, motioning for silence. A figure slipped through the shadows, a woman, cloaked and hooded, her face obscured. Who goes there? Holmes demanded. The woman hesitated, then withdrew a folded letter from her pocket. I bring a message, from V.O. Holmes took the letter cautiously. The seal was black wax, bearing an intricate symbol, a scale tipped unevenly, flanked by serpents. He broke the seal and read aloud. To Holmes, Watson, and the heir, the ledger's truths burn brighter than you know. Cease your pursuit, or the flames will consume all. The game is no longer yours to play. V.O. The room fell silent, tension coiling like a serpent ready to strike. Callister swallowed hard. They know we have the ledger. They know where we are. Holmes's eyes were steel. Then we must prepare. The shadows are closing, and the voice of the hidden demands silence. But we are not so easily silenced. The night stretched on, thick with unease and the unspoken promise of violence. In that greenhouse sanctuary, surrounded by fragile life, we steeled ourselves against the coming storm. Holmes folded the letter carefully, his eyes never leaving the shadows outside the greenhouse windows. The flickering gaslights beyond cast ghostly shapes among the leaves, as if the plants themselves were watching. We cannot underestimate V.O. Holmes said gravely, This warning is no idle threat. He commands men who will not hesitate to act. Callister sank into a chair, his face pale. I have lived in fear of this day for years. I thought my exile would keep me safe. But the ledger, it's the tinder to a fire long smoldering. Merriweather stepped forward, brushing soil from his hands. If they come for you here, this sanctuary is as good a battleground as any. These plants, many of them, are far more dangerous than they appear. Holmes's eyes lit with interest. Your poisons and countermeasures could prove invaluable. The botanist nodded. There are extracts that can disable and others that induce paralysis. You'll find no shortage of tools here. I glanced around, the air thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmines and deadly belladonnas. It was a strange, almost surreal setting for what promised to be a grim conflict. Holmes rose, his jaw set. First, we must fortify our defenses. Merriweather, prepare whatever means you have at hand. Callister, you will remain concealed at all times. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Merriweather retrieved vials of potent tinctures and carefully prepared traps, hidden needles laced with aconite, fragrant oils that masked human scent, and a bewildering array of botanical weapons. Holmes moved with his usual precision, arranging the greenhouse's entrances and exits, setting up watch posts with quiet signals. Callister was given a secure room within the greenhouse's heart, his door reinforced with iron bars concealed behind flowering curtains. As midnight approached, I found myself standing beside Holmes in a shadowed corner, the weight of the night pressing in. "Holmes," I ventured quietly, "what do you think VO's endgame is? Why revive Stalworth now?" Holmes's gaze was distant. "Control? Watson, the ledger reveals a network, corruption, manipulation, and fear, all woven together. Stalworth's return is a gambit, a move in a larger game. The elites wish to silence any threat to their fragile dominion." He exhaled slowly. But power such as theirs breeds enemies as well as allies. The ledger's exposure could unravel everything. A sudden noise, a faint footstep on gravel, stilled us both. Holmes motioned sharply for silence. We watched as a dark figure approached the greenhouse, moving with a predator's grace. Holmes whispered, "They have come." From behind a cluster of hanging ferns, Merriweather emerged, holding a small, ornate pistol. "I suggest we welcome our guests with hospitality." The figure paused, then stepped into the faint light. It was a man, tall and lean, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat and a silk scarf. Holmes stepped forward boldly. "State your business." The stranger smiled coldly. "Merely a messenger, Mr. Holmes. VO wishes you to reconsider. The ledger's secrets are not yours to unveil." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "We have no intention of retreating." The man raised a gloved hand, revealing a small box. "Then perhaps this will persuade you." Before Holmes could react, the box hissed open, releasing a plume of greenish smoke that spread quickly through the greenhouse. I coughed violently, my vision blurring. Merriweather fired a shot into the air, breaking the haze. Holmes grabbed Callister, pulling him toward the reinforced room. "Get inside," he barked. I stumbled, fighting the poisoned sting, but Holmes's grip was steady. The intruder vanished into the night as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving behind an eerie silence and the lingering scent of danger. Inside the room, we barred the door. Callister gasped, clutching his chest. Holmes scanned the ledger with renewed urgency. "They want us to know they can reach us, no matter how far we run." Callister's voice was shaky. "If they stop at nothing to silence me, then all of London's secrets are at risk." Holmes looked at me with fierce determination. "We must expose VO and his network before they destroy us, and anyone who stands in their way." The night pressed on, thick with the scent of fear and the promise of battle yet to come. Chapter 5. The Web Tightens. Dawn broke over Hampstead with a reluctant gray light, casting long shadows through the glass panes of Professor Merriweather's greenhouse. The previous night's attack lingered like a dark stain on the morning air, filling the atmosphere with a palpable tension that none of us could shake. I found Holmes standing by a bench of rare orchids, his gaze fixed on the delicate flowers as if searching for answers hidden in their fragile petals. Callister sat nearby, pale but resolute, clutching a cup of tea Merriweather had brewed with careful hands. "We've awakened a nest of vipers," Holmes said at last, his voice low and measured. "VO!" "And his network will not rest until every secret the ledger contains is buried, or every witness silenced." Callister shivered. "I thought I had left this world behind, but it seems my past refuses to remain buried." Holmes turned to me, eyes sharp and unreadable. "Watson, our path forward is perilous. We must uncover who within London's elite conspires with VO and why they fear the ledger's revelations." Before I could reply, Merriweather entered, carrying a small box wrapped in cloth. "I have prepared countermeasures, both defensive and offensive. The plants here may yet be our allies." Holmes nodded approvingly. "Excellent, but we must also look beyond the immediate threat. Who else stands to lose if these secrets come to light? Callister's expression darkened. Many. Politicians, businessmen, even clergy. The ledger names names. Men who built their fortunes on deceit and betrayal. Holmes's eyes gleamed with resolve. Then we have no time to waste. Watson, we shall begin by visiting the first name on the ledger, Sir Reginald Fairchild. If we can unravel his role, we might find the thread that leads us to VO. I felt the weight of the task settle upon us like a shroud. The game had changed. The city's shadows had grown deeper, and every step forward risked plunging us further into darkness. As we prepared to leave the sanctuary of the greenhouse, I could not help but wonder how many more lives would be caught in the web before the truth saw the light of day. The carriage rattled through the foggy streets of London as Holmes and I made our way back from Merryweather's greenhouse. The morning mist clung stubbornly to the gas lamps, giving the city an ethereal, half-forgotten quality, as though we were slipping through a dream where shadows ruled supreme. "Watson," Holmes began, his voice low and thoughtful. "Before we confront the men named in the ledger, it is essential to understand the spider behind the web. VO is not merely a shadowy figure. He is the architect of a vast and insidious network that has shaped London's fate for decades." I glanced at him, intrigued. "How extensive is this network, and how did it come to be?" Holmes folded his hands, his steepled fingers tapping thoughtfully against his lips. "Vox obscura, the hidden voice, is a moniker as fitting as it is elusive. His true identity remains a secret, though there are numerous theories, each more tantalizing than the last. What is indisputable is that his influence penetrates every strata of society." He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Imagine, Watson, a labyrinth beneath the city's polished facade, where power brokers whisper and deals are sealed in smoke-filled rooms. VO sits at the center of that labyrinth, pulling strings, controlling information, and maintaining a delicate balance of fear and loyalty." I pictured the London we knew, the respectable gentlemen, the bustling markets, the reverberations of political discourse, and yet beneath it all, a hidden current steering the course of the city. Holmes continued. His roots trace back to the waning years of the Crimean War, where he first emerged as an intelligence operative, skilled in espionage and manipulation. Over the years, he transitioned from government service to a shadowy independent agent, offering his services to the highest bidder. I frowned. "So he is a mercenary of sorts?" Holmes shook his head. "More than that. He is a master of blackmail and subterfuge. His arsenal is information, secrets that can topple governments or ruin families. He uses these with surgical precision." I asked, "How does he maintain such control without ever revealing himself?" Holmes smiled faintly. "His agents operate under layers of secrecy, each unaware of the true man behind their orders. His communications are encrypted, delivered through intermediaries who vanish without a trace. He cultivates fear and loyalty in equal measure." We arrived at a narrow street, flanked by imposing brick buildings. Holmes signaled the driver to slow. "There are those within the aristocracy and parliament who owe their positions to VO's machinations," Holmes said quietly. "Some have sold their souls for protection or power. Others are terrified their darkest secrets will be exposed." I glanced at him sharply. "Then this ledger, the one we now possess, is a threat to that entire system." "Precisely. The ledger is more than a mere record. It is a ledger of leverage, of debts owed and favors granted. Each name in it represents a thread connecting back to VO's network." Holmes's voice dropped further, and Lord Stalworth's sudden reappearance is a gambit to reclaim lost power, to remind the city that no secret is safe. I could feel the cold grip of conspiracy tightening around us. What of VO's methods? What tools does he employ to maintain his dominance? Holmes's eyes narrowed. Intimidation, blackmail, bribery, and when necessary, violence cloaked in anonymity. He orchestrates scandals from the shadows, ensuring his enemies fall before they even realize they are targets. He paused, his gaze distant. But the ledger, if revealed, threatens to turn the tide. It could expose the rot at the city's core and dismantle carefully constructed illusions. I shivered, sensing that we had stepped into a game where the stakes were nothing less than the soul of London. Holmes looked at me, resolve burning in his eyes. "We must proceed cautiously, Watson. Every move we make will be watched, and every ally may conceal a dagger." The carriage came to a halt outside a grand townhouse, its facade adorned with wrought iron balconies and heavy oak doors. Holmes turned to me with a grim smile. Our next step is to meet Sir Reginald Fairchild, a man whose name appears near the top of the ledger. If anyone can shed light on VO's reach within the government, it is he. As we prepared to enter the lair of power, I steeled myself for the revelations and dangers that awaited. The web was tightening, and the shadows growing ever darker. The heavy oak door swung open before we could raise our knocker, revealing a tall, distinguished man in his early 50s. His silver-streaked hair was impeccably combed, and his eyes held a sharp, calculating gleam that seemed to appraise us instantly. "Mr. Holmes? Dr. Watson?" Sir Reginald Fairchild greeted us with a cordial, if somewhat guarded, smile. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Holmes inclined his head politely, but without warmth. "Sir Reginald, we are here concerning matters of some urgency, matters that involve your name in a ledger recently brought to our attention." Fairchild's smile faltered ever so slightly, but he composed himself quickly. "A ledger, you say? I am afraid you must be mistaken. I know of no such document." I exchanged a glance with Holmes. "This ledger contains names of several prominent figures, including yourself, Sir Reginald. It appears to catalog debts, favors, and perhaps more unsavory dealings. We seek your cooperation to understand the nature of your involvement." Fairchild's eyes hardened. "You tread on dangerous ground, gentlemen. I advise caution." Before Holmes could respond, Callister stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "Sir Reginald, I understand your reluctance, but these secrets affect us all. I have lived in the shadows of this network and know the consequences of silence." Fairchild studied Callister for a moment, then gestured for us to enter. "Very well. Come inside. Let us discuss this in private." The interior of Fairchild's residence was the epitome of Victorian elegance. Heavy drapes, ornate furnishings, and shelves lined with leather-bound volumes. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering light over his composed features. "Pray, sit," Fairchild said, motioning to a circle of high-backed chairs. Holmes seated himself with deliberate poise. "Sir Reginald, the ledger is more than a ledger. It is a map of corruption, and your name appears repeatedly." Fairchild steepled his fingers. "You imply I am involved in something nefarious. I assure you, any dealings I have had were strictly within the bounds of propriety." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Do you deny any association with Vox Obscura?" Fairchild's lips thinned. "Vox Obscura is a specter used to frighten and manipulate. I have no knowledge of such a person, save through hearsay and rumor." Callister's eyes narrowed. "Rumors, perhaps, but your actions suggest otherwise. Meetings? Exchanges of favors. These are not accidents." Fairchild's expression darkened. "You risk much by pursuing this line of inquiry." Holmes leaned forward. "And what of the threats against your peers? The letters signed by Lord Stalworth warning of exposure?" Fairchild's composure cracked just slightly. "Stalworth was a ghost. If he has returned, then London faces a greater danger than any of us anticipated." I noted the flicker of fear beneath his polished exterior. "Sir Reginald, if these threats are real, we must act before more lives are destroyed." Fairchild sighed deeply. "Very well. There are those among us who have long benefited from the ledger's secrets. If it falls into the wrong hands, chaos will ensue." Holmes's voice lowered. "Then help us unravel this web. Tell us who you trust, who might aid us in this fight." Fairchild hesitated, then spoke in a measured tone. "There are a few allies, but trust is a rare commodity in this city. We must move with caution and discretion." As the fire crackled, casting long shadows across the room, it became clear that our path forward was fraught with peril, and that the line between friend and foe was perilously thin. Sir Reginald's eyes flickered toward the fire as if seeking courage from its flames. "To understand the gravity of our predicament, you must know the history of how Vox Obscura's influence seeped into the highest echelons of this city." Holmes and I leaned in, sensing the weight behind the words. Years ago, after the Crimean War, the government faced an unprecedented challenge, a city burgeoning with wealth but riddled with corruption and scandal. To maintain order, a clandestine agency was formed, a network operating in the shadows to manage threats to the state and the aristocracy. He paused, collecting himself. V.O. was once an agent within that network, a man with unparalleled skill in intelligence and subterfuge. But ambition turned to ruthlessness. He realized that power need not be wielded openly. It was far more effective when others feared the whisper of his name. Callister's voice was quiet but edged with bitterness. He transformed from protector to puppeteer. Entire careers, marriages, and fortunes were won or lost at his whim. Those who resisted were crushed or disappeared. Fairchild nodded grimly. The ledger is a testament to his reign, a ledger of favors owed, debts accrued, and sins concealed. It is said that many who appear righteous in public are shackled by VO's secrets. Holmes's gaze sharpened. So the ledger is a tool of leverage, keeping the elite compliant? Precisely, Fairchild replied. It binds us all in a web of complicity and fear. Even those who hate VO must tread carefully, lest their own skeletons be laid bare. I found myself wondering how many respectable men and women I had passed on London's streets carried such burdens, hidden behind polite smiles and stiff collars. Fairchild continued, The ledger's exposure threatens the very foundations of society. If the public were to learn the extent of the corruption, well, the consequences would be catastrophic. Holmes steepled his fingers. And Lord Stalworth's return is an instrument of that threat? Stalworth is both a symbol and a catalyst, Fairchild said. He was once a criminal mastermind who challenged VO's control. His death was convenient, but rumors always lingered. His reappearance emboldens those who seek to dismantle the old order. Callister's face tightened. And yet there are whispers that Stalworth's return may not be what it seems, that it is a gambit orchestrated to flush out enemies and consolidate power. Fairchild sighed. In this city, allegiances shift like the tides. Trust is scarce, and deception commonplace. Holmes tapped the ledger lightly. Then we must navigate these treacherous waters carefully. Our enemies wield secrets and shadows alike. Fairchild's expression grew somber. Be warned, there are forces within the government, the police, and even the church who serve VO's interests. Some have been compromised for years. You may find friends where you least expect them, and foes in familiar faces. The gravity of the situation pressed upon us like the thick London fog outside. This was no mere game of cat and mouse. It was a battle for the soul of the city itself. Holmes rose, determination etched in every line of his face. We will need allies, discreet, loyal, and capable, and we will need to be smarter than those who seek to silence us. Fairchild nodded. I will arrange a discreet meeting with those I trust. But remember this. The web is vast, and even the smallest movement can bring down the whole. As we prepared to leave, I glanced back at the ledger resting on the polished table, a book that bore the weight of countless lives and secrets. The city's shadows were growing ever deeper, and our journey into them had only just begun. The following evening, under a sky thick with swirling clouds and the distant rumble of thunder, Holmes, Callister, and I arrived at a discreet townhouse, nestled on a narrow, gaslit street near the Strand. The building bore no name, no indication of its purpose, just a simple brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. Fairchild greeted us at the door, his demeanor more guarded than before. This gathering must remain absolutely confidential. The men and women you are about to meet have much to lose. We entered a dimly lit parlor furnished with heavy velvet drapes, dark wood, and an array of paintings depicting stern ancestors with judging eyes. The air was thick with the scent of tobacco and aged brandy. One by one, figures emerged from shadowed alcoves, each introducing themselves in low tones. First was Lady Eleanor Ravenscroft, a woman in her late 40s with sharp features and eyes that betrayed years of political maneuvering. I represent interests within the House of Lords, she said crisply. VO's influence has eroded many of our most cherished institutions. We seek to restore integrity, but the cost is high. Next came Major Thomas Keene, a grizzled veteran with a scar running from temple to jaw. Intelligence services, long compromised, he stated bluntly. I've lost comrades to this network's poison. I'm here to ensure that doesn't continue. A younger man followed, Cyril Ashford, a barrister known for his fiery rhetoric and unyielding pursuit of justice. The law can be wielded like a sword or a shield. I aim to ensure it is never twisted again by those who hide behind the shadows. Lastly, a quiet figure, Miss Harriet Vale, a journalist with a reputation for fearless exposés and a trail of enemies in her wake. Information is power, she said softly. and I intend to shine a light where VO would rather dwell in darkness. Holmes regarded the group thoughtfully. We are united by a common cause, but divided by circumstance. We must act swiftly and with utmost discretion. Lady Ravenscroft nodded. Agreed. The ledger is our key, but we must be careful whom we trust. VO's spies are everywhere. Keene added, we've arranged a series of safe houses and couriers. Any movement must be clandestine. Ashford's voice was resolute. The law will support us where it can, but we cannot rely on official channels entirely. Miss Vale pulled a sheaf of papers from her satchel. I have uncovered financial transactions linking several politicians to VO's operatives. These documents, combined with the ledger, could break their grip. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Excellent. We will need to coordinate our efforts, share intelligence, protect witnesses, and prepare for the inevitable backlash. Callister spoke quietly. And what of Lord Stalworth? His return has complicated matters. Lady Ravenscroft's gaze hardened. Stalworth is a wild card. His vendetta threatens to burn everything to the ground. We must decide whether to contain him or leverage his return. Holmes's voice was firm. We cannot ignore him, but neither can we allow his actions to undermine our greater goal. The meeting stretched into the early hours, strategies laid bare, alliances forged in whispered confidences. Outside, the city slept unaware of the storm gathering in its heart. As we parted, Holmes placed a hand on my shoulder. Watson, this is but the first step. The path ahead will test us all. I nodded, a mixture of resolve and apprehension welling within me. The game was evolving, the stakes climbing ever higher, and the shadows around us growing darker still. The morning light did little to dispel the weight of the night's revelations. As Holmes and I stepped into the fog-cloaked streets, I could feel a chill deeper than the spring air settling into my bones. The knowledge we had gained, the fragile alliance we'd forged, felt both a shield and a beacon, one that could as easily draw us into the crosshairs of unseen enemies. Holmes's expression was grave but resolute. The gathering was a necessary gamble, Watson. We have allies now, but also a target on our backs. I nodded, recalling the wary glances exchanged during the meeting, the subtle signs that trust was a precious and rare commodity. Did you notice how Lady Ravenscroft's eyes never left the windows? And how Keene kept his hand close to his coat pocket? Holmes smiled faintly. The dance of suspicion is familiar to all who play this game. We must be vigilant. Our first course of action was to examine the documents Miss Vale had procured, the financial ledgers and coded correspondences linking key figures to VO's network. Back at 221B Baker Street, Holmes unfurled the papers on the table, eyes scanning the intricate web of transactions and aliases. Notice here, Watson, he murmured, pointing to a series of transfers disguised as charitable donations. Funds funneled through shell companies, obscuring their true source, and yet the beneficiaries are unmistakable: politicians, industrialists, even clergy. I leaned in, the pattern emerging like a dark map of influence. So VO uses these channels to maintain loyalty, buying silence and complicity. Holmes nodded. Precisely. And the ledger corroborates many of these connections, offering us a blueprint of his dominion. Suddenly, the sharp rap of a visitor at the door startled us. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a courier who handed Holmes a sealed envelope bearing no return address. Holmes broke the wax seal carefully, unfolding a single sheet of heavy parchment. His eyes darkened as he read the terse message scrawled in an elegant but chilling hand. Cease your inquiries, or those closest to you will suffer the consequences. The web watches, and it does not forgive. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This was no mere warning. It was a declaration of war. Holmes folded the note with deliberate calm. They grow impatient. We must accelerate our efforts, but with even greater caution. I asked, what of the others from the meeting? Can we trust them to be discreet? Holmes's gaze was hard. Trust is a luxury we cannot afford. We will maintain contact through secure channels, and each step must be calculated. Over the next several days, we moved with urgent purpose. Miss Vale continued her investigations, uncovering more evidence of VO's reach, while Callister worked to protect key witnesses. Fairchild coordinated discreet communications with government insiders willing to resist the shadowy power. Yet, every success was shadowed by threats. Anonymous letters slipped beneath doors, shadows lurking in alleys, and the unmistakable sensation of eyes watching from hidden corners. One evening, as I returned to Baker Street, I found Holmes in deep conversation with Callister. The tension was palpable. "We've received word," Callister said grimly. "One of our safe houses was compromised. The witness escaped, but barely. They are closing in." Holmes clenched his jaw. "Then we must act decisively. Stalworth's return has unsettled the network, and they are scrambling to protect their secrets." I realized then that we were no longer merely chasing a criminal. We were caught in a sprawling battle for the very soul of London, where every step forward invited greater peril. As darkness fell over the city, I resolved to stand by Holmes through whatever trials lay ahead. The game had grown deadly, but the truth demanded pursuit, no matter the cost. Chapter 6: Shadows and Betrayals. The fog hung thicker than usual over London that morning, curling through the narrow alleys and clinging to gas lamps like a shroud. It was a city holding its breath, its heart pounding beneath layers of mist and menace. Holmes and I met early at Baker Street, the weight of recent events pressing heavily upon us. The news of the compromised safe house had unsettled the fragile network of allies we had begun to assemble. Time was no longer on our side. Holmes's sharp eyes, usually so full of restless energy, now bore the steely edge of calculation. "Watson, the enemy grows bolder. They will seek to fracture our efforts by sowing distrust and fear." I nodded, feeling the urgency in his voice. "Do we know who breached the safe house? How they found our witness?" Holmes tapped his fingertips together. "That is the question. There is no shortage of suspects, and among our circle, anyone could be the traitor." Before I could respond, Mrs. Hudson arrived with a message. A cryptic note slipped under the door. "Meet me at midnight. The truth lies beneath the city." Holmes's brow furrowed. Beneath the city. The sewers, perhaps? The old tunnels forgotten by time? My pulse quickened. Who could send such a message? And why choose such a perilous meeting place? Holmes's lips curled in a faint, grim smile. "Because, Watson, in this game of shadows, one must be willing to walk through darkness to uncover the light." As dusk settled, we prepared for the encounter. The streets grew silent, save for the distant drip of water and the echo of our footsteps as we descended into the labyrinthine underworld of London. The secrets hidden in those depths would soon reveal themselves, and so too the betrayals that threatened to unravel everything. The dank air of the London sewers enveloped us as we navigated the narrow, twisting passages by the dim glow of a flickering lantern. The scent of damp stone and stagnant water filled my nostrils, a grim reminder of the city's unseen underbelly. Holmes moved ahead with practiced surety, his keen eyes scanning every shadow, every whisper of movement. I followed close, my senses heightened by the unnatural silence and the weight of anticipation. At a narrow junction, Holmes halted abruptly, raising a finger to signal caution. From the gloom emerged a figure, a man cloaked in a heavy coat, face obscured beneath the brim of a battered hat. "You came!" The stranger's voice was low, almost a whisper. Holmes nodded. "You sent the note. We are here. Speak quickly." The man glanced nervously over his shoulder before producing a small, folded paper from his pocket. "They watch everything. VO's reach extends even here. But I have proof, evidence that the ledger is only part of a greater scheme." I stepped forward. "Who are you? And why trust us?" The stranger's eyes flicked to Holmes, then to me. "My name is Daniel Greaves. Once I was an insider, a clerk in the Treasury, handling covert transactions. I grew disillusioned with the corruption when I discovered the extent of VO's manipulation. Hidden funds, bribery, blackmail. I gathered what I could and fled." Holmes unfolded the paper, examining its contents. It was a ledger of accounts, far more detailed than any we had seen. Names, dates, coded annotations, and references to secret meetings. "This confirms suspicions," Holmes murmured. "But why come to us?" Greaves swallowed hard. "Because I have no one else to trust. They hunt me. If I'm silenced, all will be lost." Suddenly, a distant splash echoed through the tunnels, and the faint sound of footsteps approached. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "We are not alone." The stranger's face paled. "They found me." Without hesitation, Holmes gestured sharply. "This way." We plunged deeper into the labyrinth, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind us. Our lantern cast frantic shadows on the damp walls as we raced through narrow corridors, the weight of the evidence secure but our danger immediate. At a sharp bend, Greaves stumbled, a searing pain in his leg forcing him to falter. "Go on without me," he urged. Holmes knelt beside him. "We will not abandon you." But Greaves shook his head. "You must. Take this ledger. Expose the truth." With grim determination, Holmes slipped the papers into his coat pocket. "We will return for you." As the footsteps closed in, we pressed on, the echoing cries behind us a stark reminder that in this game of shadows, trust was both a weapon and a peril. The echo of hurried footsteps reverberated through the damp, narrow passageways like the beating wings of some great nocturnal creature. The waterlogged stones beneath our feet were slippery, forcing us to tread carefully, but speed was imperative. Behind us, the voices grew louder. Gruff, urgent, filled with the menace of men who would kill to protect their secrets. "Holmes," I gasped, heart pounding as I struggled to keep pace. "How many do you think pursue us?" Holmes's sharp gaze darted ahead, his breath measured despite the frantic circumstances. "At least 3, Watson. Likely more, and not all easily deterred by the labyrinth. They know these tunnels well, but so do we." Daniel Greaves, the man who had entrusted us with the ledger of betrayal, was now limping heavily, grimacing with each step. His leg was wounded, blood dark and slick on the cold stone floor. He leaned heavily on Holmes's arm as we rounded a corner. "Steady, Greaves," Holmes murmured. "We must reach the old service exit near Temple Bar. From there, we can find refuge." The labyrinth beneath London was a twisting maze of disused tunnels, forgotten conduits for the city's ancient and complex drainage. Many had never seen the light of day for decades, but Holmes had memorized maps and scoured old plans for weeks before this desperate night. Our survival depended on his knowledge. Suddenly, from a recess in the wall, a shadow materialized, one of our pursuers. A hulking figure, face obscured beneath a soot-stained cap, lunged at us with a cry. Holmes was ready. With a fluid motion honed by countless encounters, he grasped a nearby iron rod, left over from some abandoned maintenance work, and struck the assailant's arm with precise force. The man cried out, staggering back but not down. I seized the moment, grabbing Greaves to help him stumble past. "Come! We have no time to lose." Behind us, the other men's shouts grew frantic. The chase was closing. Holmes shoved the iron rod aside, eyeing a narrow fissure between 2 stone walls. "There! Through here!" he commanded. We squeezed into the cramped space, the stone walls scraping at our coats. The air was thick and stale, every breath tasting of mildew and decay. The footsteps followed, relentless. A sudden rush of water at our feet startled me. A subterranean stream, cold and swift, surged through the tunnel. We had no choice but to cross. Holmes led, testing the footing before stepping carefully into the freezing water. I followed, supporting Greaves as best I could. "Hold on," Holmes whispered. "Almost there." Our pursuers were close now, their curses and commands echoing eerily around us. Suddenly, a shout pierced the gloom. "Stop them!" A man's silhouette emerged from another side passage, blocking our route. Holmes's mind raced. "Greaves, behind me! Watson, prepare yourself!" I drew my service revolver, an unusual act for Holmes and me, but these were desperate times. The man advanced, face illuminated by the flickering lantern light. Sharp features, cold eyes that gleamed with malice. Holmes stepped forward calmly. "We seek only to expose truth, not to engage in violence. Stand down." The man sneered. "Truth is a luxury for fools." Without further warning, he lunged, and the tunnel erupted into chaos. Holmes parried the man's attack with his iron rod, the clang of metal ringing off stone walls. I fired a warning shot into the ceiling, shards of plaster and dust raining down. The attacker faltered but renewed his assault, driven by desperation. Holmes sidestepped, delivering a swift blow to the man's ribs, eliciting a grunt of pain. I moved to secure Greaves, who was pale but determined to stand. "You must hold on, sir. We're nearly out." Behind us, more voices stormed the corridors. The tunnel was becoming a trap, a death chamber filled with shadows and peril. Holmes glanced behind, calculating. We need a diversion. Quickly, he grabbed a loose stone from the wall and hurled it toward a branching passage. The sound of falling debris echoed through the tunnel, drawing several pursuers away. "Go!" Holmes urged. We pushed forward, adrenaline fueling our escape. The exit was within reach, a rusted iron ladder descending into a grate-covered chamber near the Thames embankment. Holmes hauled Greaves upward while I kept watch for our hunters. The sound of heavy footsteps thundered behind us. "Almost there," Holmes grunted, pulling Greaves through the narrow opening. I clambered up after them, heart racing. We emerged beneath the shroud of night, gas lamps flickering in the distance. The cold river breeze was a welcome reprieve from the suffocating tunnels. Holmes closed the grate behind us just as the voices grew nearer. Outside, the city slept unaware of the desperate flight beneath its streets. We hurried down a side alley to a waiting carriage arranged by Fairchild's network. Greaves was weak but alive, clutching the ledger close. Holmes sat beside him, voice gentle but firm. "Your courage has saved many, Daniel. We will protect you, but the danger is far from over." I looked toward the darkened city skyline, knowing the night's escape was only the opening gambit in a dangerous game of secrets, lies, and shadows. The carriage jolted along the cobbled streets, the wheels rattling ominously as we sped away from the riverbank and the shadowed labyrinth beneath the city. Daniel Greaves lay slumped against the leather cushions, his breathing shallow but steady, the blood on his trousers dark and sticky beneath the dim gaslight. Holmes sat rigid beside him, fingers clenched around the ledger now safely secured in an inner pocket. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, pierced the gloom outside the carriage window. Always alert, always calculating. I stole a glance at Holmes, my heart still hammering from the narrow escape. How close were we, Holmes? Could we have been caught? Holmes's gaze shifted briefly to me, expression inscrutable. Too close, Watson. They knew the tunnels better than we anticipated, and the trap at the crossing was no accident. Someone betrayed us. The word hung heavily in the carriage's confined space. Betrayal, an ever-present shadow in this tangled game. I clenched my fists, feeling the old familiar surge of determination. Greaves stirred, coughing weakly. "I'm sorry," he rasped, voice rough with pain. "I should have taken more precautions. They must have followed me after I fled the treasury." Holmes leaned in, voice soft but insistent. "No apologies, Mr. Greaves. Your courage has brought us vital truths. We will keep you safe." Greaves gave a faint, grateful smile before his eyes fluttered closed again. The carriage eventually pulled up outside a discreet townhouse in Mayfair, a safe house arranged by Sir Reginald Fairchild's network. We moved swiftly inside, where a small contingent of trusted allies awaited, ready to provide aid and shelter. Lady Eleanor Ravenscroft was there, her face pale but resolute. "You have the ledger?" Holmes nodded, producing the folded documents. "This ledger confirms much. Transactions, meeting notes, coded references. It is the key to unraveling Ver's web." She took the papers carefully, her fingers trembling slightly. "If these fall into the wrong hands, they will," Holmes said grimly, "unless we act decisively." Fairchild entered then, his presence commanding the room. "Gentlemen, ladies, we face a war of shadows. Stalworth's return has unsettled the balance, and VO's operatives grow desperate. We must consolidate our efforts." I watched as the room buzzed with tense discussion, plans to disseminate information that protect witnesses and strike at the heart of corruption. Yet beneath the strategizing, I saw the cracks forming. Suspicion, fear, and the ever-looming threat of betrayal. Later, Holmes and I retired to a small chamber, away from the others. "Watson," Holmes began quietly, lighting his pipe with steady hands, "tonight has shown us the price of truth. VO's influence extends deep, and Stalworth's vendetta adds a volatile element." I nodded. "Do you believe Greaves can be trusted?" Holmes's eyes flickered with something like uncertainty. "He is our best chance, but we must verify every word. Trust is a luxury we cannot afford." The clock ticked on, its steady rhythm a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling around us. Outside, the city remained oblivious, but I knew the game was changing. The shadows were lengthening, and our enemies would not rest until the ledger and the secrets it held were silenced forever. Chapter 7. Web of Deceit. The morning sun struggled to penetrate the London fog that clung stubbornly to the city's streets, as if the mist itself sought to veil the dark secrets still simmering beneath the surface. Baker Street felt quieter than usual, a deceptive calm before the storm we sensed gathering on the horizon. Holmes sat at our usual table, the ledger spread before him like a battlefield map. His eyes traced the lines of numbers and names with relentless scrutiny, the faint creases in his brow deepening with each passing moment. "Watson," he said without looking up, "the ledger confirms more than mere corruption. It reveals a systematic effort to manipulate the city's very institutions, to control and silence those who might oppose the cabal." I leaned in, the significance of his words sinking like lead in my chest. "You mean Stalworth is not merely a criminal seeking vengeance. He's a catalyst for exposing a far wider conspiracy." Holmes's lips curved in a grim smile. "Precisely, and the letters he has sent to prominent figures are not random threats. They are warnings, challenges, an invitation to reveal hidden crimes." Before I could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, carrying a telegram marked urgent. Holmes broke the seal and scanned the message. His eyes darkened. A body has been found in Whitechapel, a high-profile victim bearing the unmistakable mark of Stalworth's signature. The game had escalated. The carriage ride to Whitechapel was tense and silent, the grim weight of the telegram pressing heavily upon us. Holmes sat opposite me, his eyes narrowed, lips compressed in quiet calculation. The streets outside blurred past in a gray haze, gas lamps flickering like ghosts in the fog. Whitechapel was no stranger to shadows, but tonight the air seemed heavier, charged with an unseen menace. The familiar maze of narrow lanes and crumbling brick buildings closed in around us, a stark contrast to the polished drawing rooms of London's elite, now trembling under Stalworth's threat. As we arrived, a crowd had already gathered, cordoned off by police constables. The victim lay sprawled in a narrow alley, pale in the lantern light, a single crimson rose resting upon his chest, a cruel signature left by Stalworth himself. Inspector Lestrade approached as we stepped inside the cordon, his face drawn and weary. "Holmes, Watson, glad you're here. This one's a puzzle even for us." Holmes knelt beside the body, his keen gaze sweeping over the scene with clinical precision. "Who is our unfortunate gentleman?" "A Mr. Gerald Pembroke," Lestrade replied, "a financier with ties to several questionable enterprises. He received one of Stalworth's letters just days ago." Holmes's fingers brushed the rose with care, then turned his attention to a folded piece of paper clenched in Pembroke's hand. "Watson, note this." I carefully pried the note free, revealing a cryptic message written in elegant script. "Beneath the lion's gaze, the truth roars silently." Holmes murmured thoughtfully, "A riddle, and one that may point us toward the next clue." We questioned witnesses and neighbors, piecing together Pembroke's final hours. A chance encounter with a street vendor revealed Pembroke had been seen arguing with a shadowy figure the evening before, an exchange brief but heated. Holmes's suspicions deepened. This was no random murder. Pembroke was silenced for what he knew or refused to reveal. As the night wore on, the investigation spiraled into a complex web of deceit. Connections between Pembroke, the ledger's coded entries, and the powerful elite implicated in Stalworth's campaign began to surface. "Watson," Holmes said, "we stand at the crossroads of justice and vengeance. To navigate this labyrinth, we must decode the meaning behind the lion's gaze." Outside, the city murmured beneath the fog, secrets held tightly, waiting for the right moment to be unveiled. The night had deepened into a velvet cloak, swallowing the last vestiges of daylight and replacing them with shadows and whispered mysteries. Back at Baker Street, the flickering gaslight cast long, dancing silhouettes upon the walls, silent witnesses to the mounting enigma. Holmes sat at the cluttered desk, the ledger carefully unfolded beside the cryptic note we had recovered from Pembroke's lifeless hand. The paper bore the inscription, "Beneath the lion's gaze, the truth roars silently." Elegant script, yet ominous and enigmatic. I poured a fresh cup of tea, my mind racing to keep pace with Holmes's relentless scrutiny. The words echoed in my mind like a riddle whispered through time, veiling a secret beneath layers of symbolism. Holmes's fingers traced the words as though the letters themselves might yield a clue. A classic cryptic phrase, Watson, one that demands we examine both the literal and the metaphorical. I nodded, setting my cup down. The lion? What could it signify? A statue? A coat of arms? Or perhaps something more allegorical? Holmes's eyes sparkled with that familiar intensity. Indeed, consider, Watson. The lion has long been a symbol of strength, courage, and nobility. It adorns the royal coat of arms, figures prominently in heraldry, and marks many public buildings and institutions. He rose and paced the room, hands clasped behind his back. Pembroke was a financier, tied to various enterprises. If the riddle points to a place beneath the lion's gaze, it may be a literal location, an edifice guarded by a lion statue or insignia. I mused aloud, could it be the Bank of England? The Lions in Trafalgar Square? The Lion Brewery? There are numerous lion landmarks in London. Holmes halted abruptly by the window, peering into the fog. Each possibility warrants investigation, but one in particular aligns with the ledger's entries. He retrieved the ledger, leafing through its pages carefully. Here, Watson, note this. Several transactions reference a Red Lion, not an establishment, but rather an address. Red Lion Court, near Fleet Street. I frowned. Red Lion Court? A narrow alley in the city's heart, known for its antiquated buildings and shadowy past. Holmes smiled thinly. Precisely. A perfect place for secrets to fester and for clandestine meetings to occur unnoticed. We resolved to visit Red Lion Court at once, the chill of the early morning air sharpening our resolve. The streets were still slick with the remnants of rain, gas lamps casting halos through the mist. Red Lion Court was a narrow, winding alley lined with soot-blackened brick buildings that leaned precariously over the cobblestones, as if burdened by years of whispered conspiracies. Above the entrance to an unassuming building hung a faded sign depicting a regal lion, its stone mane weathered but unmistakable. Holmes's gaze was unyielding as we stepped beneath the lion's carved visage. If the truth roars silently, Watson, then we must listen with more than ears. We must perceive with intuition and observation. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of stale tobacco. We ascended a narrow staircase to a small chamber where a cluster of papers and ledgers lay scattered atop a desk. Holmes sifted through the documents, noting annotations in a cryptic hand, ledger lines marked with obscure symbols. This is a front for a covert financial operation, Watson, a hub where illicit funds flow through veiled channels. I examined a map pinned to the wall, noting the red threads linking various sites across London, opulent mansions, shadowy taverns, and secluded docks. Holmes, I said, these connections suggest a far-reaching network. Stalworth's vendetta may be aimed not merely at individuals, but at the very infrastructure of this corruption. Holmes nodded gravely. The lion watches, but does not roar aloud. It shields the guilty beneath its silent vigilance. Returning to Baker Street with the newly acquired documents, we pored over the evidence late into the night. Holmes's mind was a whirlwind of deduction, theories weaving together like threads in a tapestry. I have uncovered a cipher within the ledger, Holmes announced suddenly, excitement lighting his features. A code embedded in the numerical sequences. He explained the cipher was a variant of the Polybius square, a device that translated letters into pairs of numbers. A technique well known in espionage circles, but cleverly adapted here. Holmes handed me a slip of paper, the coded message awaiting translation. Watson, the task of decryption falls to you. I set to work, the steady scratch of my pen the only sound as I mapped the numbers to letters, piecing together the hidden message. After several tense moments, the words emerged. Meet beneath the lion's shadow. Midnight. Trust no one. My heart quickened. Another invitation? A trap or an opportunity? Holmes leaned back, fingers steepled. The game deepens, Watson. We are drawn into a den of vipers, where every ally may conceal a serpent. The clock approached midnight when we returned to Red Lion Court. The air was thick with fog, the street deserted save for our cautious footsteps echoing in the gloom. Beneath the lion's carved stone visage, a figure waited. A woman cloaked in black, face veiled. Mr. Holmes, she said in a low voice, I bring warnings, and truths you must hear. Holmes stepped forward, eyes narrowing. Who are you? My name is Beatrice Calvert, she replied. I once served in the House of Commons, but was forced into exile when I uncovered the depths of corruption you now seek to expose. She handed Holmes a sealed envelope. Inside are names and dates, proof of the elite's complicity in crimes that Stalworth intends to reveal. But be warned, there are those who would kill to keep these secrets buried. Holmes accepted the envelope with a grave nod. We shall handle this matter with the utmost care. Beatrice hesitated, then added, Trust is scarce. I advise vigilance. As she melted into the mist, Holmes turned to me. Watson, The lion's roar is growing louder. We stand on the brink of revelation and ruin. The echo of Beatrice Calvert's warning still hung heavily in the damp London air as Holmes and I returned to Baker Street, the envelope she had entrusted to us feeling like a loaded gun in Holmes's hand. The gaslight flickered softly, casting uncertain shadows over the cluttered room, as if even the light hesitated to illuminate what we now held, a trove of secrets that could unravel the very fabric of the city's elite. Holmes broke the seal with deliberate care, unfolding a collection of papers, their edges worn and stained with age. Names, dates, coded notations, each one a piece of a grander puzzle. He laid them out on the table, his sharp eyes scanning every line with a hunger only the pursuit of truth could inspire. "These documents, Watson," he said gravely, "corroborate the ledger's insinuations. We are dealing with a cabal deeply embedded within Parliament, the judiciary, and the financial districts. Men and women who manipulate power with a ruthlessness hidden behind velvet gloves and polite smiles." I leaned closer, my eyes darting over the familiar names. Lord Craven, the Marquess of Langford, Sir Percival Maitland. All pillars of London society now revealed as players in a sordid game of corruption and control. It was one thing to suspect such things. It was quite another to hold proof in one's hand. "How far does this conspiracy run, Holmes?" I asked, the weight of it pressing down on my chest. Holmes's gaze darkened. "Deeper than we had imagined. Stalworth's letters and threats are but the surface ripples of a vast and dangerous current. This is not mere vengeance. It is a reckoning." Our discussion was interrupted by a brisk knock, and Mrs. Hudson ushered in a man whose presence seemed to fill the room. Tall, sharply dressed, with eyes like steel, Sir Reginald Fairchild. His reputation for navigating London's political labyrinth preceded him. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said curtly, his voice low and deliberate. "I come at the behest of Lady Eleanor Ravenscroft. I understand you possess information that threatens to shake the foundations of our city." Holmes's eyes narrowed, but he maintained his composure. "We do, and we intend to see justice done." Fairchild gave a thin smile. "Then you will require allies. The forces you face are formidable and well ensconced. I offer my assistance." I studied him carefully. In this game of shadows, it was impossible to know who truly walked the path of justice and who merely wore its mask. That evening, Holmes, Fairchild, and I convened in a discreet parlor near Grosvenor Square. Fairchild produced a dossier of his own, intercepted letters, surveillance notes, and whispered intelligence that traced the cabal's tendrils into every corner of London's power structure. "Lord Stalworth's campaign is but a prelude," Fairchild explained. "The secret society known as VO orchestrates these moves, seeking to purge their enemies and reshape the city's future to their liking." Holmes tapped a finger against the table thoughtfully. "The ledger, the murders, the threats, all are threads in this tapestry of control." "Exactly," Fairchild said gravely. "Our goal must be to uncover the leaders and dismantle their network before their plans come to fruition." Days blurred into nights filled with tireless research. Holmes and I pored over the ledger and Beatrice's documents, cross-referencing every name and date, hunting for a pattern. One evening, Holmes called me to his study with a spark of discovery lighting his eyes. "Watson, look here," he said, pointing to a map pinned to the wall, its surface crisscrossed with colored threads. "The cabal's meetings coincide with events at the Royal Athenaeum, a gentlemen's club frequented by London's elite." I raised an eyebrow. "A public venue for such secretive dealings?" Holmes smiled thinly. "Public enough to mask the clandestine nature of their gatherings, the perfect place to convene without suspicion." With Lady Eleanor Ravenscroft's discreet aid, we gained access to the Royal Athenaeum. The club's opulent interiors, polished mahogany, crystal chandeliers, and the faint murmur of whispered deals, stood in stark contrast to the sordid plots unfolding within. We blended seamlessly among the members, Holmes adopting the guise of a refined gentleman with a taste for chess and whiskey, while I played the part of a knowledgeable companion. Through subtle observation and careful listening, we learned of a meeting scheduled in the club's private chamber, known as the Lion's Den, an ironically fitting name given our recent encounters with the lion's symbolism. At the appointed hour, we slipped into the Lion's Den. The room was thick with cigar smoke and heavy with the scent of fine brandy. Around a polished oak table sat several familiar faces, their expressions carefully guarded, yet charged with purpose. A tall man with piercing eyes rose to speak. "Gentlemen, the time to act is near. Stalworth and his sympathizers threaten to unravel the order we have long maintained. We must move swiftly to silence this insurrection." Plans were laid bare, discrediting witnesses, manipulating the press, and eliminating threats with ruthless precision. Unbeknownst to the conspirators, Holmes and I committed every word to memory, aided by hidden recording devices. But our luck waned quickly. A sharp-eyed attendant noticed Holmes's intense gaze and muttered a warning. "They have discovered us. We must depart at once." With practiced stealth, we slipped away as the room filled with shadows and suspicion. Safe back in Baker Street, breathless and wary, we reviewed our haul. "The cabal's power is vast, but now we hold their own words against them," Holmes said, resolve etched into every line of his face. "Yet this victory paints a target on our backs." Days turned tense as we kept a close watch, wary of every shadow and whisper. Then came the letter, crisp, unsigned, but unmistakably from Stalworth himself. "You tread a dangerous path, Mr. Holmes. The lion's roar grows louder, but beware the claws beneath the mane. Trust no one." Holmes crushed the note slowly, eyes dark as storm clouds. "Trust," he murmured, "is a luxury long lost to men who hunt in darkness." Yet we press onward. The city around us teetered on the edge. Beneath the polished surface of society's elite lurked greed, betrayal, and a venomous struggle for control. And in the heart of it all, Stalworth's roar was a summons. To justice, to vengeance, or perhaps to ruin. Chapter 8. The Whispers of Power. The days following our daring venture into the lion's den were marked by a suffocating tension, as though the very air in London had thickened with unseen menace. Even the familiar streets seemed altered, faces more guarded, steps more hurried, and shadows lingering longer than reason should allow. Baker Street had become both refuge and prison. Holmes spent hours locked in his study, poring over every scrap of evidence, cross-referencing names, dates, and whispered rumors. The gaslight flickered overhead, casting erratic shadows on the walls lined with books and chemical apparatus. I watched him from time to time, noting the relentless intensity in his gaze, the way his hands moved with precision over the documents. "It seems, Watson," he said one evening without looking up, "that the cabal is mobilizing its resources. They have begun a campaign of subtle but deadly retaliation." I frowned. What form does this retaliation take? Have we been directly threatened? Holmes gave a weary smile. "Not yet, but our friend Lady Eleanor has informed me that she narrowly escaped a fire set at her estate last week. A warning, no doubt." The news chilled me more than I cared to admit. To see danger creep so close to those allied with us was a bitter reminder that this was no longer a mere intellectual exercise, but a battle for survival. Word of our discoveries, though carefully guarded, had begun to ripple through London's corridors of power. At Whitehall, the atmosphere grew charged with paranoia. Lords and ladies, once confident in their influence, now cast wary glances, their whispered conversations laden with veiled threats and urgent alliances. Holmes and I attended a discreet dinner party hosted by Lady Eleanor, an event designed to gauge the mood of the city's elite and to seek further allies, or at least determine who could be trusted. The drawing room was a study in elegance. Heavy velvet drapes, crystal chandeliers shimmering over polished wood, and an orchestra of hushed voices punctuated by the clink of fine china. Lady Eleanor herself was the perfect hostess, poised, graceful, yet unmistakably steely beneath her genteel exterior. Holmes and I mingled, listening to conversations that danced around the topic of the cabal without ever naming it outright. The atmosphere was one of polite civility, masking underlying fear. I found myself conversing with Lord Fairfax, a man whose reputation for integrity was well known. Yet, as I pressed gently on his views of the recent upheavals, I glimpsed a flicker of unease. "Troubling times, Dr. Watson," he said quietly. "The stability of our society depends on discretion and order. Too much exposure threatens to topple the delicate balance." I nodded. "But surely justice must prevail, Lord Fairfax. Can such corruption be allowed to fester in the shadows?" He sighed, eyes darkening. "Justice, yes, but at what cost? The city needs guardians as much as it needs truth." Later that night, Holmes and I retired to a small study adjacent to the drawing room. Over brandy and the quiet crackle of a dying fire, we shared our observations. The elites fear exposure more than retribution, Holmes mused. Their power is a house of cards, and Stalworth's return threatens to topple it all. I nodded, thinking of Beatrice Calvert and the women like her caught between these forces, brave souls who dared to stand against the tide. But this fear could be our advantage, Holmes continued, eyes glinting. If we can stoke the embers of mistrust within the cabal, perhaps they will turn on one another, fracturing their unity. I considered the complexity of the situation. A dangerous gambit, Holmes, but perhaps our only hope. As we made our way back to Baker Street through the fog-cloaked streets, a figure stepped from the shadows, blocking our path. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," the man said, voice low and urgent. Holmes recognized him immediately. Detective Inspector Bramwell, a seasoned officer known for his unyielding pursuit of justice. "There are developments," Bramwell said without preamble. "Another letter has arrived, addressed to the Prime Minister himself. Threatening, cryptic, signed by Stalworth." Holmes's expression hardened. Then the stakes have risen yet again. Bramwell's eyes darted nervously. And worse, the cabal has begun to strike back openly. 2 of our informants were found dead under suspicious circumstances. The chill in the inspector's words was unmistakable. Back at Baker Street, the letter to the Prime Minister lay upon the table, its ornate script and cryptic message suggesting a mind as sharp as it was dangerous. The lion's den is open, and the hunted will soon become the hunter. Watch your steps, lest you fall prey to the shadows you cannot see. Holmes studied the note, his jaw clenched. This is a warning and a promise. As the night deepened, we worked tirelessly, piecing together the implications. The cabal was not only consolidating power, but also eliminating threats with ruthless efficiency. Our investigations led us to new corners of London, opulent townhouses, clandestine meeting places, and even the dimly lit backrooms of taverns where whispers of rebellion stirred. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. News of mysterious deaths, sudden resignations, and secret investigations leaked into the public sphere, fueling gossip and speculation. One afternoon, as I walked the streets near the Thames, I observed the contrasting faces of London, the grandeur of Whitehall and Westminster, the cramped tenements of the East End, and the bustling markets teeming with life and hidden danger. It was clear that this struggle for power was not confined to the drawing rooms of the elite, but rippled outward, touching every corner of the city. Returning to Baker Street, I found Holmes staring out the window, the city lights blurred by rain. "We stand at a crossroads, Watson," he said softly. "Each step we take must be measured, for the stakes have never been higher." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Holmes smiled faintly, the flicker of his usual confidence returning. "Indeed, my dear Watson, the game is afoot, and this time, the prize is the very soul of London." The rain had settled into a steady, relentless drizzle by the time Holmes and I returned to Baker Street, and if the letter addressed to the Prime Minister lying heavily on the table between us. The soft flicker of the gaslight overhead cast wavering shadows across the cluttered room, and I could sense an almost tangible weight pressing down on us, as if the very air had thickened with menace. Holmes's fingers drummed absently on the armrest of his chair, his piercing eyes fixed on the cryptic script before him. "The cabal's reach extends deeper than we suspected," he murmured, voice low and deliberate. "Targeting the Prime Minister is no mere threat. It is a signal that they are prepared to unleash their full power." I felt a chill creep up my spine. The fact that the highest office in the land was now in the crosshairs made the stakes unmistakably clear. We were no longer chasing whispers and shadows, but standing at the precipice of a confrontation that could shake the very foundations of the British Empire. Holmes stood abruptly, pacing the room in restless circles. This phrase, "the hunted will soon become the hunter," suggests a calculated move by Stalworth. He is no longer merely on the defensive. He intends to strike, boldly and decisively. I rose to my feet, feeling the urgency ripple through me. Then we must anticipate his target, his moment. The letter's tone implies he will act in a public arena, where the impact will be impossible to ignore. Holmes paused, fixing me with a steady gaze. "Exactly, Watson. We must uncover when and where." The days that followed were consumed by tireless work. Holmes expanded our circle of informants, leaning heavily on the discreet assistance of Lady Eleanor and Sir Reginald Fairchild. Social events became hunting grounds for intelligence. Holmes, ever the chameleon, adopted various disguises: a scholarly professor at one soirée, a shadowy figure whispering in the corners of smoky taverns at another. I accompanied him faithfully, ever watchful for signs of danger. One particular evening found us at the Aldwych Club, a grand establishment bathed in opulence. The crystal chandeliers threw prisms of light over the polished floors, and the soft murmur of polite conversation filled the expansive ballroom. Holmes's keen eyes caught a subtle tension between two men whose names had surfaced repeatedly in the documents, Lord Craven and Sir Percival Maitland. Though their words were careful and measured, the rigid set of their shoulders and the sharp glances they exchanged spoke volumes. "They grow restless," Holmes whispered. "The fragile unity of the cabal begins to fray under the pressure of Stalworth's return." I watched Lord Craven lean in, his voice barely audible. "Our enemies grow bolder, and impatience threatens our control." "Impatience breeds mistakes," Holmes noted grimly, "and mistakes are the chinks in any armor." Back at Baker Street, our efforts turned toward deciphering the code embedded in the threatening letters that had plagued several high-profile targets. The cipher was elaborate, a complex dance of symbols and misdirection. Hours spilled into early mornings as Holmes and I pored over the documents, applying every cryptographic method in our repertoire: frequency analysis, pattern recognition, and deduction. Slowly, fragments of messages began to coalesce, hinting at a forthcoming gathering where the cabal would convene to finalize their plans to crush Stalworth's uprising. Our intelligence pointed to a derelict warehouse on the fringes of the docks, a place long abandoned by the city's commerce, but ideal for clandestine meetings. Holmes and I resolved to observe it from the shadows. The fog that night clung to the city like a living shroud, muffling sounds and blurring the outlines of gas lamps and stone walls. The chill in the air bit through our coats as we took up position, eyes straining to catch every movement. Figures began arriving, cloaked and hooded, moving quickly and quietly through the mist. Their voices were low but charged with urgency. Holmes whispered, "This is the heart of the storm. Here, the cabal will chart their counterattack." The sense of peril was immediate. No sooner had we settled into our concealed vantage than a sharp-eyed sentry spotted us. A terse signal was given, and suddenly we were surrounded by men whose faces were hidden beneath hats pulled low. The fight was swift and brutal. I grappled with a burly brute, each of us struggling for control, while Holmes deftly disarmed another with practiced ease. The fog swallowed our sounds, the clash of bodies and grunts muffled beneath its cold embrace. Despite the danger, Holmes managed to wrest from one man a leather-bound ledger, its weight significant in his grasp. We broke free and melted into the mist, hearts pounding, lungs burning. Once safely back at Baker Street, we wasted no time examining the ledger's contents. Its pages were dense with records of illicit dealings, bribes, threats, and transactions linking the highest echelons of power to the darkest underworld dealings. The sheer scale of corruption was staggering. Names of dukes and ministers inked alongside shady figures and foreign agents. Each entry deepened the web of intrigue and danger we faced. Holmes's eyes gleamed with fierce determination. "This ledger is a weapon, Watson. It holds the power to dismantle the cabal's influence if used wisely." Yet even as hope flared, the shadow of retribution loomed large. The cabal was ruthless and would not relinquish their power quietly. The letter to the Prime Minister was not the last warning we would receive. London itself seemed to hold its breath, teetering on the edge of upheaval. The following days were a relentless dance of evasion and pursuit. Holmes and I moved through the city's labyrinthine streets, following leads that took us from the grandeur of Westminster to the squalor of the East End. Every corner held the possibility of danger, every passerby a potential threat. Our allies remained few and cautious, their trust fragile as glass. One evening, as we stood gazing out the rain-streaked window of Baker Street, Holmes spoke quietly, almost to himself. "We stand at a crossroads, Watson. Each move must be precise, for a single misstep could cost us everything." I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Whatever the cost, we must see this through." Holmes returned my gaze with a faint smile. Indeed, my dear friend, the game is afoot, and the prize is the very soul of London. Chapter 9. Shadows Amongst the Veil. The first chill of early autumn had settled over London by the time the ledger was securely hidden away in our Baker Street lodgings. Outside, the gas lamps flickered faintly beneath a smoky, overcast sky that threatened rain at any moment. The city seemed to hold its breath, caught in a moment of uneasy calm between the violence we had witnessed and the storm yet to come. Holmes sat at his cluttered desk, fingers steepled beneath his sharp chin, eyes darting rapidly as he reviewed the ledger's contents by the flickering light of a single candle. "There is more here than mere financial corruption, Watson," he said, his voice low but urgent. "The ledger records transactions. Yes, but also names, dates, locations of meetings, and references to something far more clandestine than bribery. There is mention of the veil and coded references to the Eye of Horus." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued and unsettled. The veil? The Eye of Horus? Are these names for factions within the cabal? Holmes nodded gravely. Precisely. It appears the cabal is not a single entity, but a coalition of secret societies, each with its own agenda and internal rivalries. The complexity of their web rivals any criminal enterprise I have encountered. I sat back, digesting the implications. So Stalworth's return threatens not only corrupt politicians, but the very framework of these shadowy organizations? Exactly, and that makes our task even more perilous. We are no longer dealing with simple criminals or disgruntled aristocrats. We have stumbled into a maelstrom of power, secrecy, and ancient allegiances. Holmes's gaze hardened. We must proceed with utmost caution. The following morning, Holmes arranged a discreet meeting with Lady Eleanor at her Mayfair residence, a sumptuous townhouse tucked behind tall iron gates and blooming wisteria. The drawing room was a study in Victorian elegance, with heavy damask curtains, polished mahogany furniture, and walls lined with shelves of leather-bound volumes. Lady Eleanor awaited us, her composure serene but eyes sharp as flint. "We have uncovered disturbing truths," Holmes began without preamble, "about the cabal's internal divisions and the nature of their alliances. It seems they are fragmented yet united by a common purpose, to maintain their grip on power at any cost." Lady Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. The veil and the Eye of Horus have long operated beneath the city's surface. Their influence touches everything, from Parliament to the docks, from the Crown's advisors to the street gangs. To oppose them is to invite ruin. Holmes regarded her gravely. "Then we must strike where it hurts them most. Their secrets. This ledger holds the key, but we cannot act alone. We require allies who understand the stakes and have the courage to stand with us." She nodded slowly. "There are few such people, but I know one who might help." She paused, then added quietly, "His name is Edmund Carraway, a man who walks both the corridors of power and the shadowed alleyways. His loyalties are as enigmatic as his reputation." Holmes's interest was piqued. "Arrange an introduction, Lady Eleanor. We must tread carefully, but every ally is precious." The meeting with Edmund Carraway took place days later in a dimly lit tavern in the East End, a stark contrast to Lady Eleanor's drawing room. The tavern was thick with the scent of tobacco and spilled ale, the murmur of low conversation punctuated by occasional laughter and the scrape of wooden stools. Carraway was a man of middling height, with a hawkish nose and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His clothing was unremarkable, yet he carried himself with a quiet confidence born of experience and cunning. Holmes wasted no time. "Mr. Carraway, we seek to dismantle a cabal that operates through a network of secret societies. The Veil, the Eye of Horus among them. We possess evidence that could expose them, but we face enemies who are ruthless and well-connected." Carraway listened intently, then smiled thinly. "You speak of dangerous foes indeed. I have long danced with shadows, Mr. Holmes. If your cause aligns with mine, I offer my assistance. But be warned, this game is played with knives in the dark." Holmes inclined his head. "We understand the risks. Our enemy is not only clever, but brutal." Over the next several hours, Carraway shared his knowledge of London's underworld and elite circles, revealing pockets of resistance and betrayal within the cabal's ranks. He spoke of secret rendezvous in underground catacombs, coded messages slipped between aristocrats, and operatives embedded in government offices. Back at Baker Street, the ledger's secrets became clearer, yet the peril grew. Each new piece of information pointed toward an event of monumental significance, a convocation where the cabal would unveil their ultimate plan to silence Stalworth's rebellion and reassert control. The location was cryptic, referred to only as the Sanctum. Holmes and I worked through endless maps, coded entries, and cross-references. The tension was palpable. London itself felt like a pressure cooker, ready to explode. One evening, a sudden knock at the door startled us. It was Lady Eleanor, pale but determined. "There is no time to lose," she said breathlessly. "I have learned that one of our allies has been compromised. The cabal moves swiftly to root out dissent." Holmes's jaw tightened. "Then we must act before they strike again." The days that followed were a blur of clandestine meetings, coded correspondence, and careful surveillance. Holmes, Carraway, Lady Eleanor, and I formed a fragile coalition, each playing our part in a deadly chess game. The cabal's power was immense, but cracks were appearing. The ledger had sown seeds of distrust among their factions, and rumors of betrayal circulated with increasing frequency. Yet the risk of exposure grew ever more dangerous. One cold night, as Holmes and I patrolled the shadowed streets near the docks, a sudden movement caught my eye. A figure darted from the gloom, a courier, clutching a small envelope addressed to Holmes. The man vanished into the fog before we could react. The letter inside bore a chilling warning: "Your interference will bring ruin. Cease now or join the fallen." Holmes folded the note with calm resolve. "They are desperate and dangerous, but we will not be silenced." As autumn deepened, so too did the mystery and menace that surrounded us. London's fate teetered on a knife's edge, and Holmes and I stood at the heart of a game whose outcome none could predict. The next move was ours, but the price of failure would be nothing less than the soul of the city itself. The city seemed to grow darker with every passing day, as if the very fog that cloaked its streets conspired to smother the truth. Holmes and I moved with heightened caution, our footsteps echoing faintly through the narrow alleys and deserted quays. The threat against us was no mere idle warning. There was a deliberate hunger behind it, a menace sharpened by months of evasion and confrontation. Lady Eleanor's alert about compromised allies had shaken our fragile coalition, but it also steeled our resolve. Each step now had to be calculated with precision, every contact scrutinized for possible betrayal. We found ourselves walking a tightrope between exposure and discovery. The ledger remained our most precious weapon, its brittle pages revealing deeper layers of conspiracy. The references to the Sanctum haunted my thoughts. It was described in code as a place of final judgment, a site where the cabal's most secret and terrible deeds were carried out under the guise of ritual and power. Holmes theorized that if we could uncover the location of the Sanctum, we might intercept their plans before they came to fruition. One evening, after a particularly long session of cross-referencing the ledger's coded entries with Carraway's knowledge of the city's subterranean network, Holmes turned suddenly from his cluttered desk. "Watson, I believe we have found our next destination. There is a passage beneath the city, an abandoned crypt used centuries ago, now forgotten by most, save for those who walk in darkness. It fits the references to the Sanctum perfectly." My pulse quickened at the thought. The very idea of descending into the bowels of London to face such danger stirred both dread and determination within me. We arranged to meet with Carraway and Lady Eleanor under cover of night. The plan was to explore the crypt cautiously, gather evidence, and, if possible, disrupt whatever machinations the cabal intended to unleash. Our journey took us through twisting back streets and shadowed courtyards until we reached an inconspicuous iron gate hidden behind a tangled thicket of ivy. With Carraway's deft fingers, the lock clicked open, and a pungent draft of stale air greeted us as we stepped inside. The stairwell spiraled downward, damp stone walls closing in like the embrace of the grave. Our lanterns cast flickering light upon ancient inscriptions, half erased by time. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant drip of water echoing through the tunnels. Holmes moved ahead with the sure-footedness of a man accustomed to darkness, his keen eyes scanning every corner. I followed close behind, my heart pounding as if to announce our intrusion to whatever unseen watchers might lurk in the shadows. Deep within the crypt, we discovered a chamber, vast and vaulted, its walls adorned with faded frescoes depicting scenes of judgment and sacrifice. In the center lay a stone altar, stained dark with age and something far less innocent. Caraway crouched to examine the floor. The cabal uses this place to bind their oaths and silence dissent. The ledger's warnings were no exaggeration. A sudden sound, a whisper, a footstep made us freeze. The flickering lantern light caught a figure slipping behind a pillar. Holmes stepped forward, voice calm but commanding. "Reveal yourself." From the shadows emerged a slender man cloaked in black, his face partially hidden beneath a hood. His eyes gleamed with cold intelligence. "You trespass where you do not belong," he said quietly. "Yet you have come far, perhaps too far." Holmes's expression hardened. "We seek only to end the darkness you have spread over this city." The stranger smiled thinly. "The darkness is old, Mr. Holmes, and London breathes because of it, not despite it. You cannot undo what has been wrought." Tension crackled in the stale air as the standoff lingered. I tightened my grip on my revolver, prepared for violence, but hoping for reason. After a tense moment, the man withdrew a folded paper and tossed it onto the altar. "A message for you, if you are clever enough to decode it." With that, he slipped away into the shadows, vanishing as mysteriously as he had appeared. Holmes unfolded the paper carefully. The cryptic symbols immediately caught his attention. "An invitation, or a challenge," he muttered. "They are toying with us." The night outside was cold and unforgiving, yet inside that ancient crypt, the web of mystery had only grown more tangled. We had stepped deeper into a world where loyalty was a mask, and every secret uncovered brought us closer to danger, and to the heart of the cabal's shadowed power. As we ascended from the crypt's depths, I felt the weight of what lay ahead. This was no longer a mere investigation. It was a battle for London's very soul. The damp air clung to us as we ascended from the crypt's oppressive depths, the weight of the folded paper burning in Holmes's hand like a silent summons. The stone steps seemed endless, winding upward through the narrow passageways that had been forgotten by time and memory. The faint drizzle outside had turned to a steady rain, the city's relentless pulse muffled beneath the thick canopy of fog. When we finally emerged into the cold night, London was a city both familiar and strange, its gas lamps casting pools of amber light in which shadows danced with sinister intent. Holmes held the mysterious note carefully, as though it were a fragile relic rather than a possible trap. "This," he said quietly, "is no ordinary summons. The symbols on this parchment are part cipher, part ritual. An invitation wrapped in a challenge, designed to test both intellect and nerve." His eyes gleamed with that characteristic mixture of excitement and foreboding. I watched him carefully as he examined the markings, the loops and angles reminiscent of some ancient alphabet, interwoven with coded numbers and arcane sigils. "What do you make of it?" I asked, the chill of the night biting through my coat. "It is a puzzle," Holmes replied. "The cabal, or some faction within it, wishes to draw us out, perhaps to trap us, but such arrogance can be our advantage. They underestimate how well we can read between their lines." Caraway, ever the pragmatist, lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly, smoke curling in the damp air. "If they want a game, then let them have it. But we must be prepared for all manner of deceit and violence. Their reach is long and their patience terrifying." Lady Eleanor, standing a little apart, nodded gravely. "This is no longer merely about uncovering secrets. We have stepped into their arena, and the rules will be harsh indeed." Back at Baker Street, the room seemed colder, more austere, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows that stretched and twisted across the walls like dark fingers reaching for us. Holmes spread the note out on the table, the parchment's intricate markings stark against the worn wood. The rain tapped steadily against the window pane, a metronome marking the passage of time. For hours, Holmes worked methodically, applying every cipher technique he had ever learned, from substitution ciphers to polyalphabetic scrambles and even obscure alchemical codes. His mind was a whirl of connections, each symbol teased apart and examined under the intense scrutiny of his brilliant intellect. "There," he finally murmured, eyes sparkling. "The note conceals coordinates, a meeting point, and a time. Tomorrow night, the hour of the wolf." "The hour of the wolf?" I echoed, puzzled. Holmes smiled faintly, the expression carrying the weight of experience. The hour when the boundary between the living and the shadows is thinnest, between 2 and 3 in the morning, a fitting time for a rendezvous of those who dwell in darkness. Our group exchanged tense glances. The cabal was daring us to step into their world, and it was a gauntlet we could neither ignore nor easily accept. Lady Eleanor's voice was steady but edged with steel. We must be ready for anything. The location, according to these coordinates, is within the abandoned warehouses along the Thames, a place long thought derelict but perfect for clandestine activity. Carroway leaned forward, the faintest smirk crossing his lips. Then we shall meet their challenge head-on, but we must not go unprepared. The hours that followed were a frenzy of planning and preparation. Holmes took inventory of weapons and equipment, ensuring that every detail was accounted for. I polished my revolver, a familiar comfort amid the uncertainty. Lady Eleanor secured communications with trusted allies, and Carroway reached out to his network in the city's underbelly. As the night deepened, an uneasy sleep claimed me, haunted by dreams of shadowy figures and whispered threats. The weight of the cabal's power pressed on my mind, a heavy shroud that neither time nor distance could lift. The following evening, we convened at the appointed hour near the mist-wreathed docks. The Thames, swollen with recent rains, churned sluggishly beneath the iron bridges. The warehouses loomed like silent sentinels, their dark windows staring blankly into the fog. Holmes moved with the confidence of a man who had faced down shadows before, but even he showed signs of tension. "Remember, Watson," he said quietly, "this may be a trap, but it is also an opportunity. We must uncover their plans before they enact them." We entered the cavernous warehouse, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath our boots. Our lanterns pierced the gloom, revealing crates and rusted machinery draped in cobwebs. The stale air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. Suddenly, a faint rustling echoed from the far corner. We froze, senses straining. From the darkness emerged a figure cloaked in black, face obscured beneath a wide-brimmed hat. In a voice as cold as the night, he spoke. "Welcome, Mr. Holmes. We have been expecting you." Holmes stepped forward without hesitation. "And who, pray, might you be?" The figure inclined his head. "A messenger, a witness to the inevitable. You tread on dangerous ground, but you have courage or folly that cannot be denied." From the shadows, other figures emerged, their faces hidden beneath masks painted with arcane symbols. The room seemed to contract with the weight of their presence, an invisible pressure that threatened to crush the air from our lungs. Holmes's eyes flicked to each of them in turn. "You call yourselves the Cabal, but I see only frightened men clutching at power. Your grip is loosening. We are here to end your reign." A murmur ran through the masked assembly, but the spokesman held up a hand. "We offer you a choice. Detective, join us or be destroyed." I felt my blood run cold. The offer was both absurd and terrifying. Could Holmes consider such a thing? But his answer was swift and absolute. Never. A tense silence followed, broken only by the distant tolling of a church bell. The messenger smiled thinly. "Then prepare yourselves. The game has truly begun." The air thickened with the scent of danger as the Cabal's representatives melted back into the shadows, leaving Holmes, Lady Eleanor, Carroway, and myself alone in the cavernous warehouse. The sense of foreboding was overwhelming, yet beneath it burned a fierce flame of resolve. As we exited into the fog, Holmes's gaze was fixed and unwavering. "Let me know if you'd like to continue with the next section, F, or explore a new thread in the story, F. They believe intimidation will silence us, but they underestimate the strength of conviction and the power of truth." Lady Eleanor nodded, her eyes shining with unyielding fire. "Then we must strike harder and faster, for the future of London depends on it." The night swallowed us as we vanished into the mist, determined to unravel the Cabal's machinations before their darkness could consume us all. Chapter 10. The Crucible of Shadows. The night air was sharp and biting as we made our way from the warehouse, the echoes of masked threats still ringing in our ears. The city seemed to hold its breath, as if London itself sensed the gathering storm. Holmes's expression was grave, but there was a flicker of something fierce in his eyes, a fire kindled not just by intellect, but by the urgency of the moment. "We have drawn their hand," Holmes murmured, voice barely above the whisper of the wind. There will be no retreat now. The cabal's next move will be desperate and deadly. Lady Eleanor, ever poised but visibly strained, glanced over her shoulder. Our allies are compromised. Every step forward must be measured. The cabal's reach is vast, and their vengeance swift. Caraway's usual bravado was tempered tonight. We must rely on what we have uncovered, the ledger, the decoded notes, and the courage to act. But even so, the final confrontation will not be easy. We returned to Baker Street under the cloak of darkness, the familiar rooms now charged with a weight that made the air heavy. Holmes immediately began assembling a plan, spreading maps and documents across the table, his fingers tracing the routes and safe houses we had painstakingly marked. The key to their power lies in their secrets, but also in their fear. They will protect the sanctum at all costs, for it is their altar and their fortress, Holmes said. If we are to end this, we must strike there. The sanctum, those two words carried the echo of ancient rites and modern horrors. Holmes revealed that he had managed to triangulate the location to an old underground chamber beneath the city's financial district, hidden beneath layers of construction and secrecy. The cabal's elite would gather there soon to enact their final plan. The following hours passed in feverish preparation. We equipped ourselves with the necessary tools for infiltration: lanterns, ropes, small firearms, and a keen knowledge of the underground tunnels that wound like a spider's web beneath London's streets. Let me know if you'd like to proceed with Chapter 10, F, or explore a different path in the story, F. When the appointed night arrived, a heavy fog clung to the city, like a shroud. Our small group, Holmes, Lady Eleanor, Caraway, and I, made our way toward the heart of the city, where the buildings grew taller and the streets narrower. The faint hum of activity below suggested the cabal's gathering was already underway. We descended into the labyrinth beneath the city, where the cold stone walls bore the weight of centuries. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of decay. Our footsteps echoed as we crept deeper, every sound magnified in the silence. Suddenly, ahead of us, flickering torches illuminated a vast chamber. We paused, concealed in shadows, and peered in. Within the chamber, cloaked figures stood in a circle, chanting in low, measured tones. Symbols we had seen in the ledger were etched into the floor, glowing faintly in the torchlight. At the center stood a tall figure in robes of deep crimson, the head of the cabal. Holmes's whisper was tense but resolute. This is their crucible. The moment when power is renewed and alliances are forged or broken, we must act now before the ritual completes. We exchanged determined looks and moved forward with careful steps. Suddenly, a sharp click, a trap. The floor beneath us gave way, plunging us into darkness. We landed hard in a subterranean chamber, the air thick with damp and the faint hum of hidden machinery. Our lanterns revealed rough stone walls and iron bars, a prison beneath the prison. Lady Eleanor gritted her teeth. They have anticipated our move. We are caught in their web. Holmes quickly assessed our surroundings. We must find a way out and disrupt the ritual above. Time is against us. The walls bore inscriptions, another puzzle. Holmes's mind raced to decode them as we searched for an exit, all while the distant chanting grew louder. With a sudden burst of insight, Holmes traced the sequence of symbols, revealing a hidden mechanism that opened a secret door. We slipped through just as the ritual reached its crescendo. Back in the main chamber, chaos erupted. Holmes called out, "Now, Caraway! Signal our allies!" From a concealed alcove, Caraway released a series of flares, brilliant bursts of light that illuminated the chamber and startled the Kabbalists. Lady Eleanor sprang forward, her voice ringing with authority as she denounced their crimes. The ritual shattered, and in the confusion, Holmes and I seized the ledger, proof of their guilt, and delivered it into the hands of the city's authorities, waiting just beyond the chamber's threshold. As dawn broke over London, the cabal's shadow began to lift. The city stirred from its long nightmare, and with the cabal exposed, justice, however slow, began to take root. Holmes, ever the enigmatic figure, allowed himself a rare smile. "This is but one battle in an unending war, Watson. But it is a victory that must be savored." I nodded, the weight of the long struggle easing. London's streets were still cloaked in mist, but the dawn had come, and with it, the fragile hope of light. The echo of the flares still lingered in the cavernous chamber as the last of the Kabbalists scrambled in disarray, their chants cut short by the harsh intrusion of light and sound. The oppressive atmosphere, once thick with whispered incantations and heavy purpose, was shattered, dissolved into hurried footsteps and muffled curses. Holmes moved swiftly, his eyes keen and sharp as ever, darting between the masked figures who now sought escape or concealment. Watson, secure the ledger. We cannot afford to lose the evidence that will bring this cabal to justice. I clutched the ancient book tightly, its worn leather binding absorbing the weight of the moment. Let me know if you'd like to continue with the next chapter, F, or review any earlier part of the story, F. The ledger was not merely a record. It was the key to unraveling years of corruption, deception, and the sinister manipulation that had poisoned the city's elite. Every page spoke of betrayal, secrets exchanged under the guise of loyalty, and the ruthless pursuit of power. Lady Eleanor, her face stern beneath the flickering torchlight, stood guard by the entrance. We must ensure none escape to warn others. The cabal's roots run deep, but their branches will be severed tonight. Carraway nodded, already moving to block the narrower passageways with makeshift barricades and his own network of contacts. The tension was palpable, a delicate balance between chaos and control. Holmes's voice was calm but resolute as he addressed our small group. We have one opportunity to end this. The authorities are en route, but their arrival may be delayed. We must act decisively. With that, he signaled toward a cluster of Kabbalists who had taken refuge near a side chamber. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Holmes's hand was steady, his mind razor-sharp, as he directed movements and anticipated every counterattack. I found myself drawn into the fray, relying not just on physical strength, but on the trust I placed in Holmes's unerring judgment. The Kabbalists fought with desperation, their masks slipping to reveal faces etched with fear and fanaticism. Suddenly, a sharp cry broke through the chaos. A warning. From the shadows emerged a figure I had not expected, Lord Stalworth himself. He stood tall, his presence commanding even amidst the turmoil. His eyes, dark and unreadable, flicked between us with a mixture of challenge and calculation. "You believe you have won, Mr. Holmes," he said, voice low and dripping with menace. "But the game is far from over." Holmes met his gaze without flinching. "Lord Stalworth, your reign of terror ends tonight." The criminal mastermind's smile was cold, almost amused. "Perhaps, but in every end lies a new beginning, and in the shadows, power never truly dies." Before any of us could react, Stalworth pressed a hidden mechanism beneath his cloak. A section of the chamber wall shifted, revealing a narrow escape route. Without hesitation, he slipped through the opening, vanishing into the darkness. "After him!" Holmes commanded. But the passage was too small, too labyrinthine to pursue without risking entrapment. We were forced to watch as Stalworth disappeared into the depths below the city, an enigma escaping once again, leaving behind a trail of questions and unfinished business. The arrival of the city's constables brought a semblance of order. With the ledger in hand and the cabal's leadership partially apprehended, the wheels of justice began to turn. But the specter of Lord Stalworth's escape loomed large, a reminder that the battle was far from complete. As dawn's pale light filtered through the grime-streaked windows of Baker Street, Holmes and I sat in quiet reflection. The city outside stirred, waking to a new day tempered by uncertainty and hope. Holmes broke the silence, voice soft but firm. "We have won a crucial victory, Watson, but the game continues. Stalworth's shadow will linger, and the cabal's roots run deeper than we have yet uncovered." I nodded, the weight of the journey settling upon me. "Then we must remain vigilant, for London and for all who seek justice." Holmes smiled faintly, the familiar spark returning to his eyes. "Indeed, my friend, the game is never truly over." Epilogue, shadows cast long. The city had settled into a fragile calm. London's streets, once cloaked in the thick fog of fear and secrecy, now carried the tentative light of dawn's early rays. The cabal had been fractured, its nefarious plans laid bare before the court of law, and many of its members imprisoned or vanished into the dark recesses from which they had emerged. Yet, despite the victory, the echo of Lord Stalworth's escape resonated through my thoughts like a lingering chill. Let me know if you'd like to start a new chapter F, or explore a character's backstory F. His disappearance was not merely a failure of capture. It was a reminder that some shadows refuse to be banished. Holmes sat by the window in our Baker Street lodgings, his gaze distant but penetrating. Justice, Watson, is a complex machinery. It moves slowly, often imperfectly, but it moves. The ledger we secured will cripple the cabal's influence for years to come, yet Stalworth remains a specter, a question mark hanging over the city. I poured 2 cups of tea, handing one to him as he continued. There are men like Stalworth who thrive in the cracks of society, in the shadows between law and chaos. They challenge the very order we strive to uphold. Lady Eleanor and Caraway had departed for their respective duties, her to her charitable works and political influence, him to the underworld's tangled networks. Our paths had diverged, but the bonds forged in the crucible of danger remained unbroken. Looking out at the awakening city, I felt the weight of all we had endured. The truth was a fragile thing, often obscured by layers of deception and fear, but it was also a beacon, guiding us through darkness. Holmes's voice softened, almost to himself. I have no doubt, Watson, that our paths will cross with Stalworth again. His cunning is matched only by his ambition. Until then, we must remain vigilant, ready to face whatever shadows may rise. I nodded, the familiar resolve settling over me. Our work was never truly finished. But in the heart of London, beneath its fog and its lights, a small measure of peace had been won. And that, I thought, was enough for now. Thank you so much for listening to our Honoring Audiobooks original Sherlock Holmes adventure. We hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to leave a comment letting us know which story you'd like to hear next and where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our detective fans around the world. See you in the next adventure. Let me know if you'd like to create a new Holmes Mystery F, or explore a prequel set during the Cabal's rise F.